Hi everybody, welcome to Adobe Live on Behance.net. You may be joining us on YouTube. Either way, welcome. We're here with Nathaniel Dodson. My name is Michael Jarrett and I'm gonna be hosting today. Welcome, this is day three.
Day three.
We've been here live for 2 days prior to this doing some awesome Photoshop compositing work. Nathaniel is a pro, he's a master at this, and he's been sharing a ton of great tips, so really looking forward to another day full of tips, full of Photoshop. Go ahead and let us know where you're from in the chat right now. We love to get a sense for who's up at 4 a.m., 2 a.m., 6 a.m., who's at work. It's always nice to have you here. So, tell us a little bit about what we're gonna do today.
We don't have a specific composite in mind today. We're more or less gonna cover a lot of the fundamentals that are gonna help you composite anything. So we're gonna composite a car from one scene to another. We're gonna composite a person from one scene to another. We're gonna talk a little bit about matching light and color and saturation and some fun stuff like that.
All right.
And perspective.
Perspective.
And I'm not good at perspective, but the fundamentals don't change whether you're good at perspective or not. So we're gonna give it the old college try. And I think it's gonna work out all right. But I just have to give that disclaimer because I'll probably mess something up. I gotta say, the last 2 days have been so much fun.
Yeah.
It's been like we turn the cameras on and then the 2 hours is over like that.
Right, it's gone really quickly.
It's
yeah,
so fast.
Absolutely.
And when it's going fast, I think you're having fun, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So it's been great. We've covered a lot of good stuff. Check out the replays, and you'll see we've covered some really, really neat stuff, and very different from what we're gonna do today. So we're gonna have a nice, broad package of composite type stuff by the time this is all said and done that you'll be able to attack and use yourself.
Nice. And I've been learning a lot. It's been amazing to have you here. Just want to let everybody know that today we're doing a random giveaway in about 30 minutes. All you have to do is participate in the chat on behance.net/live. And what better way to participate than ask amazing, challenging questions of Nathaniel.
The more challenging, the better.
Yeah, we've gotten some really great questions. So if there's anything during the stream or any curiosity you have about Photoshop specifically related to photography, compositing, editing, be sure to ask that. Just say hey, just participate in the chat, and today we're gonna be giving away this amazing book of artwork. It's called Super Modified. It's artwork from the Behance community.
Feels very nice.
It's a really nice
It's
book.
like you can tell it's high, it's top shelf stuff.
Yeah, you put this on your coffee table,
you'll have a lot more friends very quickly.
They're gonna be coming over to take a look at it. So 30 minutes from now, we'll be doing a random giveaway. Just say something in the chat, say hey, ask a question. And then later, at 1.5 hours from now, we're gonna be reviewing 2 portfolios, okay? So check the portfolio review tab next to the chat tab, and there's instructions there. You fill out a little form and submit your portfolio. Today, specifically right now, we're looking for portfolios that are about photography or maybe compositing, photo composites. That's Nathaniel's specialty. It's a big interest of mine, so if you feel like your work fits in that category, don't be afraid to submit it, and we'll take a look at it, provide some feedback, give our thoughts. We'll be doing that in 1.5 hours. So
it's gonna be great.
Yeah.
It's gonna be great.
I think we're ready to dive right in.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
I'm ready. All right, so we're gonna kick things off with the blank slate here in Photoshop. There's a lot of different stuff that we're gonna play with, but we're gonna begin trying to composite a car that's admittedly already sort of been isolated over its own white background. But again, the principles remain the same. And when you're compositing an element over a solid color background like this, especially when you have in the back of your head that you wanna get the perspective just right, a lot of times a photo like this is actually much more difficult to do. Now, when you're working with a car, you have angular lines and things, right? So I can come in here and say, let me just change the fill of my line here as I begin drawing lines. I think yellow will be able to be seen here. In fact, let me just stretch out my image quite a bit wider so we can all see what's going on here. Let me just throw a white background down there. All right, so with this car, I can go ahead and say like, all right, one line of perspective comes off probably here at like the base of the wheels, right? Really, if you're drawing a car, you're coming through the axles, right? So you're coming through the axle this way, and then you would also be going through the axle back kind of across this way, but it's difficult to see that other wheel, right? We can kind of see the bottom of it, so we can kind of take a guess as to where it is. But if you're drawing the car, you're probably gonna draw your perspective lines first and then fill the car in. But for the photo, a little difficult to do that. So I usually try to get perspective from one side of a car. And because again, this is, normally if this was a photo of a car in an alleyway, we could get the lines from the buildings going down the alley or the road, and the car is in the same scene as the alley, so the perspective is just gonna match. And you'll see exactly how we're gonna use these lines in a moment. but I'm gonna zoom out one more time. What I'll probably do is try to take a perspective line off like the top of the wheels, something sort of like that. Maybe kind of, I'll lift it up just a little bit, sort of like that. So these could be our two beginning perspective lines, right? And we're gonna come back and talk a little bit more about how this perspective works in a little bit, because the first thing, of course, we need to do is isolate the car on the background. I just wanna give you guys a little teaser of how we're gonna jump into some of this perspective stuff. And by the way, getting the perspective lines right, both in the scene into which we'd be moving this car and also on this car, it's important for two things. It helps you put the car in the correct position in the new scene and also size it correctly. So a lot of times a composite will not look real, not even necessarily because you couldn't match the color or the lighting or anything like that, but if you put a person in another scene and they look like a giant, you know, you might not even be able to tell what it is. You just, when you look at it and say, that's not right.
wrong,
Something's wrong there. But by lining up the perspective, getting the perspective correct, you kind of alleviate that issue. Now, the big disclaimer here with this perspective stuff that I got to give you is, if you're working with, let's say, this woman here, very difficult to find perspective of an image like this, at least for me, because I don't have any context that I can kind of pull from. Like I said, you know, if she's walking down an alleyway, I got those lines that I can steal. But in this case, it's very difficult to find that perspective because it's kind of so abstract. She's sort of floating in, you know, this white outer space, if you will. And there's not a lot of angular lines and things. I've seen people take lines off of shoulders and hips and things like that. But again, it's still kind of a crapshoot. It's difficult to do. Again, at least for me. Maybe there's a perspective expert out there who is amazing when it comes to that stuff. And if so, my hat is off to you.
Right. Say hi.
All right. Exactly. All right. I'm just going to crop this image back in. I'm going to delete those extra cropped pixels because I don't need them. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And what we're going to do is, in fact, I'm just going to load this as a selection, image, crop. And we're back to kind of our standard stock photo here. I want to go ahead and just isolate this car over this background. It's going to be a little tricky because not only do we have to get the car, we got this big shadow beneath it. We got to see what's going on with that. And also we can see through the windows. So we have our work cut out for us. But we're going to begin, as we have the last few days, by grabbing the quick selection tool and trying the new artificial intelligence infused select subject
Nice.
option here in Photoshop. We'll see what that does for us. It should do a pretty decent job, as you see. It's got some difficulty with the shadow because the shadow has that gradation. Do I select black? Do I select gray? Do I select white? So it's kind of understandable that it's all over the place down there, but that's actually fine because we're probably going to come in there and use something like our polygonal lasso tool or regular lasso tool maybe. Hold down shift and just loop a selection around like the shadow there. And then I'll come down over here. This will all be stuff that I end up hand masking in with the brush tool later because we're going to have to build a shadow for this and everything like that.
How important is the shadow in this image right now?
I mean,
it may or may not work.
Well, the shadow. So the
extent.
shadow where it is now is fine. The difficulty usually is getting a clean matte edge, and the matte is basically where the black is fading into the white. If we're putting this over, let's say, a green road or a forest path or something, there's going to be no white down there. So you need a black or very dark green that fades to just green and doesn't have all these shades of totally desaturated gray.
Yep.
So for that reason, we'll probably end up getting rid of the bulk of the shadow and just using this shadow to understand where the shadow should be and just repainting our own shadow or creating a selection and feathering it, and you get the point. So now that I have this rough selection, this is pretty good. I'll probably zoom in here. I can correct these little edges. You can see we got to get a little bit there. This is stuff that's going to be very difficult for any tool in Photoshop to pick up. In fact, really the best way to select a car is to use the pen tool and go through and just select perfectly straight lines. You see what just happened there with my polygonal lasso tool? I held down the space bar. This is just a total side tip that can be really helpful for you. Sometimes when you hold down the space bar tool, especially while you're using this tool, I don't know if it's a glitch, I don't know what it is. It happens all the time and it shouldn't happen. When you let go of space bar, it drops a point wherever the polygonal lasso tool was. You can undo the last polygonal lasso tool step by just hitting your delete or backspace key, and that'll just kind of fix that little whatever's going on there for you. And then, we can loop around. I'm not going to take the time to, kind of select this whole thing just perfectly, but there we go. I'm just cleaning up that edge. I'm going to add here to the edge right like this, and we're going to have to clean this mask up a bit, and that's fine. Oops, I did this the wrong way. I should have held down Alt-Option and subtracted. I'm a professional. I'm a professional. I had to tell myself that. when I mess up. All right, hold down Alt or Option here, and we're just gonna come through here. There's gonna be a little white fringing left. Don't worry, we're gonna clean all that stuff up. I'll show you. I'm just gonna go through. I'm gonna make sure I'm not missing any essential elements. There is a little edge of red right through here that I think I need to try to include here. And this is, guys, this is all before we go into select a mask. See, there goes the polygonal lasso tool doing its thing again. A little delete backspace key. That's such a helpful little hotkey. And we'll go ahead and just seal that off. By the way, to seal off my selection, I'm just holding down Command or Control, and you just click anywhere, and it'll automatically join wherever the lasso tool is to the beginning point of that lassoed selection. That can be a really nice, helpful, time-saving tip. So we're gonna come right through here. Just gonna kind of straighten some of this stuff out. There we go, that's great.
And no matter which selection tool you're using currently, you're always adding to the overall selection.
Exactly,
right?
I'm adding, unless it's something that needs to be cut away, if I've got a big chunk of the background selected. And like I said, you can see we're going through this. If you're fast with the pen tool, honestly, you're gonna get just as good, if not a better, probably a better selection, just rifling through this with the pen tool. I just kind of want to make this accessible for everybody that's watching, because the pen tool, it's not necessarily an advanced feature in Photoshop, but it's approaching advanced. So just in case you're not necessarily comfortable with the pen tool, we're just going along, and I'm just going to show you it can be done with polygonal lasso as well. And you know what? A circle is just a series of very short straight lines. So even with the polygonal straight edge lasso tool, we could still bring this down around a curve just like this, just lots of little bites taken out with the polygonal lasso tool, and you'll get what looks like a nice rounded edge, just like so. So that can be a quick and dirty way to get a selection. Again, especially if you're not comfortable with the old pen tool. And I would recommend you get comfortable with the pen tool, because it's an amazing tool. It's super duper powerful, but let's be real, not everybody's comfortable with it. All right, so I can zoom in here. I can check this out. I'm gonna clean this edge up just a smidge.
How are you digging the curvature pen tool now that it's in Photoshop? You have familiarity with it?
I use it every once in a while for some graphics. I just used it recently for a project. I can't remember what it was, but I did bust out and actually use it in a way that wasn't just like showing it off to somebody. Mm-hmm. So, hey, if I use the tool once and it gets me through something, I'm glad it's there. And in Illustrator, the curvature pen tool, I use it a bit more. Again, it's something, maybe I think about it in terms of graphical stuff, because I've just used it in Illustrator for a little bit longer, since it's been there for a little longer. But I don't know. It might be something over the coming years. I find that I'm using it all the time, and it just hasn't quite worked its way into my workflow quite yet. All right, so
Carol says, with the pen tool, there isn't a learning curve, it's a learning cliff, which is kind of true.
There's a double entendre or a pun in there somewhere as well.
Exactly. Great job, Carol. Keep them coming.
Yes, the pen tool, it can be tricky. It can be tricky, and tricky is probably an understatement. All right, now that we have our base selection, again, I'm ignoring through the windows here. We're going to take care of that in a moment. Part of the tricky thing about that is we want to maintain some of that like semi-opaqueness. We don't just want it to look like a total clear shot through the car. We want there to be something there. And we'll get to that. But I'm going to go filter. Not filter, select and mask. And we can see what we've got here. Now, because this was over a white background, and because we don't have layers underneath onto which we're compositing this yet, probably using the on layers view like we talked about yesterday, maybe not as good. I tend to like the red overlay for something like this. This can be really useful and helpful, and because we're working with the red car, you can even change it to something like green if you really want something that contrasts well, and you can see like, whoa, we got really nice clean edges up around the top of the car, right? Down around the bottom, we know the shadow is not going to be perfect, but guess what? We don't care, because we're going to fix that later. We're going to build our own shadow. All right, so I can just look at this, and if I go dark, the darker you go, the more you're really, and by the way, you can see I basically have it black. The reason it's not solid black is because the opacity here is not up to 100. But you can see we can go really dark, and we're really not getting any bad, crazy fringing. That's really nice. Still, despite that, I'm going to smooth it a little bit, and I'm going to feather it like, very little bit, maybe like 0.5, a teeny, tiny bit. You go too much, it looks very fake, but just a little, everything when you see it has a little bit of a fuzzy edge. We don't see, through our eyes at, 120 frames per second, and, full 4K or 8K crazy UHD. So I'm gonna go contrast. I'll boost contrast a little bit, maybe push that up to like 20%, something like so. And then I'm gonna come down here and I'm just gonna output a layer mask. So the layer mask is just gonna mask away all that background that we don't wanna see, and we've got our car isolated on this background. Now comes the process of number one, cleaning up the selection, and then number two, establishing perspective for our car, which we already kind of did before, but we're gonna redo it. and then also finding the horizon in the image into which we're bringing the car. And that image, I should pick that image. Maybe we'll go like this asphalt road panorama. We'll try this. We'll see about adding it to this. If this doesn't work, maybe we'll go with this winter shot here and have some fun with that.
Different seasons.
Yeah, we'll try one or the other, and we'll mess around with them and have a little bit of fun. All right, so before we go any further, before I even try to clean up the shadow down here, I think the cleaning up of the shadow is going to happen once we're in the new scene, because then we'll have all the ambient light, and the ground is going to look the way the ground should look and everything like that. But one thing that's not going to change are these windows. And I know I said I wasn't going to use the pen tool, but I'm very tempted to just use the pen tool and wax these selections real quick. So let's do that. We're going to start by just creating a path here, and the path is going to create a path over in the Paths panel. And it's basically going to be something we can select from at any point. So the pen tool, really, we'll click it once here, and then I'm going to click here, and I'm going to drag to just get the curve of the little vertical up and down point. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and click the tangent, sorry, not the tangent handle, but the control point, the anchor point, and it's going to suck that tangent handle back in, so I can just go straight across the bottom, just like this, and then I can go straight up like this, and maybe even click to add just a little bit of that curve there. And I have, you can see a little tangent handle sticking out there, and I kind of like that because we're heading into a curve. So I'm probably gonna, I don't know, maybe go to about the peak or climax of the curve here and try to drag this out something like, I don't think I picked a good point. No, I did. I picked an all right point. I'm gonna go there, but what I'm realizing is I need to come back here and adjust this tangent handle because we've got some messy stuff there. So I can hold down Alt or Option, I can select that, and I can say, look, hey, we need you to cooperate with us a little bit here. So come on over to where I gotta move the anchor point altogether. Whoops. So I'm gonna grab, you can leave a path while you're working on it. We're gonna grab the direct selection tool. I really should have zoomed in on this more, I guess. There we go. See, we're not quite all the way up into that corner, so I'm just gonna grab and drag that, and then I'm gonna adjust my up and down path first, and then I'll go ahead and tweak this and try to get this.
I love it. For as long as it took me to learn the pen tool, for as long as it takes anybody to learn the pen tool, there's something so satisfying about just adjusting everything, all the Bezier curves, all the points until you get it just right.
And so you can see here, we really have this second sort of bulge happening in here. You can just grab the pen tool. We can add another point right there. And I can grab the direct selection tool and I can say, look, you point right there, just correct this issue for me, will you?
Yeah.
And Photoshop automatically gives you these long tangent handles sticking out, and what that ensures is just that the curve of the path is gonna just flow together instead of being this like jagged looking thing, because part of the beauty of a sports car is you got these just lines that, you know, kind of never end. There's always a line to pick up where another line lets off. There's really not a lot of this very hard-edged geometric stuff. I mean, I drive a Cadillac, and that kind of has some of that boxy, hard-edged stuff.
Yeah, which I Jeep, which is also boxy.
All right, so
neither of us are driving this Audi, but
maybe not all cars are like that, but some are. All right, so we're just going to adjust this a little bit here. There we go. All right, I think that's good enough. And now I'm going to switch back to the pen tool, and all I need to do is click on here. My tangent handle's still there. It's a little bit long, so I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. I'm going to suck this back in. And then we're just going to join this right here at the end. Look at that. See how perfectly that runs right across there? Now the key is I'm going to hold down Alt or Option when I join it, just in case there's any crazy wayward tangent handles. It just ensures that you're going to get a smooth, perfect selection heading back into that. Now part of the cool thing is we can save this path, of course, right? I can just call this P window for passenger side window. Although if this is, what is Audi, I believe they're made in Germany. So the steering wheel will probably be on the other side of the car, but I can see here that it's not. So this is the passenger side window. And when you have any path selected, Command Return, that's Control Enter, will convert it to a selection. Now I'm gonna hit Command or Control D because I wanna continue drawing out windows here. So I'm gonna zoom in on this window, and we're gonna very quickly, we're gonna try to do this one a little bit faster here. So I'm gonna knife through here. Well, I don't wanna right click. We're off to a flying start.
We are flying. And just so everybody knows, while he's making some beautiful curves, Bezier curves, we got about 10 minutes before we're doing this giveaway. Beautiful book, super modified, full of
Behance artwork. And what do the good people
artwork.
have to do again to qualify for
All
the
you have to
giveaway?
do is say hey, say where you're from, ask us a question, ask Nathaniel a question. Today's the last day that he's joining us on this stream, so it's a really good chance to get all the info you could ever need. There's only 755 viewers online right now, so you have a really good chance of getting some direct question asking time with Nathaniel. Of course, you've got tons of great videos on your YouTube channel, Tutvids.
All kinds of stuff people can go over there and
you could become
Learn
a
from.
Photoshop master. Just watch those and practice, and in no time, we might have you on the stream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In no time flat, you'll be impressing all your friends.
We got people from all over the world. I saw a ton of locations earlier. Some people are in the evening. Someone's from space. Where is a good place to learn how to use the pen tool? Do you have a pen tool tutorial?
I actually have a 5-part like mini tutorial. It's like each part is like 6 or 7 minutes, and we cover everything from creating. It's free. It's on the YouTube channel, but everything from creating simple lines and curves with it, all the way to using like the path operations tools that will allow you to add to and subtract from selections and start to use the pen tool much like you would use it in something like Adobe Illustrator. So it's such a deep tool, and there's so much you can do with it that it was just, as I was making it, I thought, do I want to make one 50-minute long video, or should I just kind of pare this thing down and make it a little bit palatable for the good people out there? And
pen tool series.
yeah, thankfully I kind of not really dumbed it down, but just broke it up. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
There you go.
So you can see here, because I have this set to just combine shapes here, I'm really just creating these shapes and they're being added to the same path layer, which is totally fine. We just need to create the selection. And then I'm going to come in here with the pen tool, and real quick, we'll just grab this one here.
We've got a question. What was your first car, Nathaniel?
My first car was a 1998 Ford Taurus. I bought it for $2,000 from a mother whose son had died in it. So she just wanted it out of her driveway and out of her life. And there was a part of me that was tempted to be like, I can drive a hard bargain. Give it to me for $1,000. But then the human side of me is like,
empathetic side of
right,
you was
you
like,
just lost
well,
your
yeah.
son. And it was weird because like after I bought it, I found some stuff in there that was not stuff you want to find in a car. I'll put it to you that way. And it was interesting. But that car, I love that car. It lasted forever.
Interesting. My second car was a Ford Taurus.
Oh, really?
Yep.
The very first time I ever drove it, I parked the car in a parking garage in Center City, Philadelphia, where you have to hand your car off to a parking attendant. And the guy driving it, I guess it was one of these like dark garages, as most garages are, he turned the parking lights on. And he left the parking lights on. And actually, I was going to see Ben Wilmore. It was a Photoshop thing at PA Convention Center years and years and years ago. And I got back to my car after the Photoshop thing, and the battery was dead.
Yep.
So that was my first drive with the car.
Nice.
And an hour and a half later, one AAA battery jump later, I was on the road.
Nice.
It was beautiful. I think I was like 16, though. I don't know why my mom let me drive down into the city alone. No, I could have been 16 because you can't legally drive in PA without. I must have been 17 or something. Whatever. I was able to drive.
Oh,
I'll put it to you that way.
Yeah.
I'm able to drive. All right. So now that we have the selection of these windows, we don't want them to be clear see-through. So if we come into our mask here, I just Alt-Option click the mask to view the alpha channel. If I fill this with black, which I can do by just inverting the white, the opposite of white is black. Command or Control I will invert that. I'm going to Alt-Option click on the mask again. You can see we literally see right through the car, which is okay, but it's not ideal. We still want some of that haze from the glass as you would normally see. So I'm going to undo this a couple times. We're going to enter back into the mask. We're going to use kind of a cool little functionality here, and it is going to be a feature of levels. So I'm going to hit Command or Control L. Within the layer mask, you can of course go Image Adjustments, Levels. And what I want to do is just reduce the white point. So by reducing the output white point, we're telling Photoshop, look, within the selection that we have here, within our mask, take white, which in a mask, white is like, okay, so I'm a white guy. If I wear a black ski mask, the white bits are the bits you see. The black bits, everything is hidden. That's exactly how a mask works in Photoshop. The black stuff, it's like covering it with a black cloth. And if you cut a hole in it, you have like a white table underneath it, the white stuff, that shows through. So when I paint with white, the car shows black, all that stuff's gone. However, varying shades of gray in between show different levels of opacity. So like super dark gray will almost hide whatever it is that you've got going on. Super light gray will just barely, it just kind of like shaves a little bit off the top, makes it a little see-through. So we're gonna try to pull this white point back. Maybe we'll go like around 50% gray. So we'll go somewhere around 128 because we got 256 levels here, and 128 times 2, well, 256, right? I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. I'm gonna Alt or Option click to get back out to my car, Command or Control D, and you can see we now have a little haze. So there are the windows with the background. There's the haze. Now, because this is a white background, right? Because it's a white background and we know we're going to a not white background, I bet you if I drag this over, let's just take a look here over our background, the haze it's a little bit too much. Like it's just a little too, it kills off the contrast a little bit too much. Okay, so I'm gonna just get rid of that for a second. Let's go back, let's undo a couple times and get ourselves back into our mask, Alt or Option click. So I'm gonna go Command or Control L. And now instead of just going halfway, I wanna make the windows less see-through. Let's bring it back to, I don't know, 75, something like that. So we'll go like 3/4 of the solidness of the glass is now gone. They're only 25% the strength they were, and I think this will be about perfect. Command or Control D to deselect, Alt or Option click on that layer mask to get back to our car. And we've got our car isolated. Our car is ready to rock and roll. We're ready to go. I'm gonna drag this over to the asphalt road, and I'm just gonna save this. Because I've been told the last few streams I don't save enough.
We saved at the end of each stream, and luckily, luckily everything went well.
Now that we spent all that time doing the selection, the last thing I want is Photoshop to crash. Right. And I'm not superstitious, so no, I'm not going to knock on wood. Boom, Photoshop crash.
Car crash.
All right, so we've got this saved. We're ready to move along here, and it's time probably before we even mess around with perfecting the shadow, colors, light, brightness, any of that stuff. What I want to do is get this thing on the road where it kind of needs to go. So there are a few things we can do here. I mean, first and foremost, I'll probably, I want to convert this to a smart object because I want to make it smaller, but I also kind of don't because I want to keep working on the original mask because of the shadow. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide it for a moment. But what I'm looking at here is these wheels. Maybe I can create a temporary guide here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my line tool. I just have my fill set to yellow. I think if yellow is difficult to see on stream, let me know. I can change the color. And I'm just going with like, I don't know, let's push it up to 20 pixels, the 20 pixel weight, no stroke. And we're just gonna create a line kind of across the wheels, across the bottom of maybe like the rims, right? And I'm just doing this because, well, you'll see what I'm about to do here. I'm holding down spacebar, by the way. In Photoshop, as you're drawing any shape or drawing out a selection, you can, while you're dragging out, hold down spacebar and you can move that selection or shape around and just get the perfect selection or perfect shape. That's
super helpful.
Yeah,
you don't have to.
It's one of those things that I just take for granted,
exactly.
Right? I almost do it, and half the time I don't mention I'm doing it, and I should because it's another game changer amongst all the game changers we've been talking about here over the last few days. All right, so we've got this little guide, and I'm just throwing this in here. Don't worry about that. It's just I punched in a control up in the toolbar that I didn't want. So I've got this line here, and this is just kind of letting me see the direction of the car. So one of the things we can try to do, and I have no idea if this is going to work well for us here or not. We're just going to kind of play with it and see what happens. I'm going to hit the little lock icon to unlock the background layer and Command or Control J to duplicate it. I can even right-click and convert this to a smart. I'm not going to convert it to a smart object. I want to keep this kind of destructive, editable. That's part of the reason I duplicated it. We're going to go Edit, and we're going to choose the Perspective Warp option. And what this is going to allow us to do is we can just drag out a grid and begin trying to find rough perspective in our image. So let's say our vanishing point is, I don't want to say the vanishing point there, that's more like the focal point. I feel like vanishing point's more like here, and then we'll move down over here along our horizon. I should probably boost this up a little bit, something kind of like that. Let's pull this along the guardrail here, and then this guy over here we're going to pull out along maybe like the center line in the road, something like that. Maybe like that should be cool. Zoom out a little bit. Should I drag it over a little bit more? So this is what I'm talking about, folks. When it comes to perspective and me, we have an on again, off again type relationship.
It can be a hard thing to get correct,
because
especially
I'm always
with a curve in the road.
Yeah, and I'm always tempted to follow exactly the lines in the image, but sometimes, like this, in this case, the lines are curving and whatever. We're gonna roll with this. I'm gonna add to this perspective grid here. I'm just gonna drag another grid out. And I don't know if you can see it, but as you approach the edge of another grid, it like highlights. When it does that, it means it's just gonna attach the grids together like that. And here in this case, I'm just gonna continue. I'm gonna kind of continue out my perspective, but I'm gonna give this a little bit of like a barrel feel, right? So maybe actually what I'll do is I'll make this, ooh, I can't go that tall because we're gonna really mess up the trees if I do that. I'm gonna go like that. Really stretch this out. You know what, that's gotta be higher.
Shakti is asking, what is the other grid for? I assume the second grid. What basically are we doing right here when we set up this
So
grid?
all we're doing is we're establishing a series of perspective planes that Photoshop is going to use, as you're going to see in a moment, to either so normally you would use perspective warp to correct the lens distortion, barrel distortion, things like that. Let's say you're an architectural photographer. I just used this recently. I was in Pittsburgh and I was photographing some high-rise buildings there. And you've got this 16mm lens. You're on the ground. So as you photograph this building in portrait orientation, your lens is like splaying the building in almost this like reverse pin-cushioned way, right? So you want to try to like straighten that out, and a lot of times you're going to straighten it out perspective-wise by widening the top and bottom of the shot. If you go and find like really high-end architectural photographers and you look at photos they've taken of like hotels and high-rise buildings, a lot of times the building almost has this fluted shape. And that's because they're forcing this crazy lens correction onto a shot that was probably shot with a wide-angle lens and probably from a lower than ideal angle. Really, really, really amazing architectural photography. I mean, there's great architectural photographers that do that, but a lot of really great architectural photography is done from the sky, so you can get a really, like I want to be at somebody's hip level when I photograph a portrait, like a full-length portrait. I want the camera to be about at their hip. To get to the hip level of, like, let's say One World Trade Center, you got to be 800 feet in the air, right? You're not doing that from the ground.
No, a helicopter or drone or something.
And so on and so forth. What do we need to?
We're gonna do this.
Do we need to
We're
do
gonna
the
give
giveaway?
this away right now. We're gonna give this away. All right, so we've already look at this. We got people giving book hype for the last
Book
couple
hype,
minutes.
book. What's the book called? Is it just called Behance?
It's just called Super Modified.
Super Modified. It looks like it's a bunch of like awesome Behance projects.
The Behance book of creative work. In fact, well, hyper-realistic drawing, that's some of my favorite artwork.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible. Yeah, I don't know if this will render super well.
I mean, come
These
on.
are drawings.
They look like photos.
With
They're pencil
graphite.
sketches.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe, in fact, there might be some high-end architectural photography in here, hopefully with as little distortion as possible. Got some pretty cool Photoshop.
Yeah, I've seen that kind of
work.
stuff before.
So we're going to give this out. Everyone's been chatting, is in the running for this. I think a name will be submitted
Alex
to
says,
us.
give me the book.
Give me the book.
Brent, book. Freddie, this is my type of books.
Well, it's gonna come from
Freddie.
somewhere. The name will appear.
The name will appear in front of us
magically,
magically.
randomly.
It's a
We'll halt
holograph.
everything in this book.
We'll have a holograph appear in
And the
front
good
of us.
news is, if you haven't participated in the chat, if you still want a chance to win this book, go ahead and say something, throw up some hype, ask us a question, let us know where you're from, just say hey, and
Exactly.
you might be receiving this book.
And it just feels nice. Like, it looks nice, but it also feels nice, which means it's a book that will fulfill not one but two senses: the touch and the eyesight.
It actually kind of smells.
It kind of
nice.
smells good
Yeah,
too.
It
I
kind of
was gonna
smells
say.
good. It's got the new book smell. So if you know what we're
Now that
talking
Michael's touched it, it smells great.
about. So let's continue
all right, cool.
until.
Yeah, let's
Oh,
keep
we have a
working
name.
on this.
It's rendering in front of us.
It's appearing
This is
one
kind of
letter
Willy
at a
Wonka
time.
style. Okay,
It's appearing.
we're gonna have to get this last name correct. The winner of today's book, her name is Claire. Last name,
I'm gonna go say Zedo.
I think it's Jetto. I think it's got a harder the S and the Z together. But congratulations, we're gonna throw your name in the
Or is
chat.
it one of those names where you have to begin like you're saying the letter S, but then switch to Z, like a new, like the wildebeest?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, where you
GN.
begin
Oh,
like
yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying G, but it goes right to the N.
There we go.
There
Congrats,
we go.
Claire.
Claire up in the chat.
Claire, everybody give Claire some props. She
Yeah.
has
Throw some love up
she's
in the chat
newest
for Claire.
owner, of the super modified book. Congratulations. Thank
Very
you for
cool.
participating, everybody.
It's a killer book.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna put that over here. That's gonna be coming to you, Claire, and let's get back into.
All right. Yes. So I'm
good work.
I could create one more. Maybe I will. One more little grid here. And again, the perspective, probably not really exactly as it should be for this grid, but I think it's going to kind of probably, hopefully, sort of work. That's a lot of modifiers. Kind of, hopefully, probably, sort of work for what we want it to do.
Really confident in what we're
We are
about to do.
extraordinarily confident in what we're about to do. So once you build your grid, you have this layout option in perspective warp. And when you're ready to warp, you go ahead and hit warp. But by the way, you've got kind of these presets where you can level vertically, level horizontally, or level both. And it's kind of like the auto feature. If you use the Lightroom transform panel or the transform tools in Camera Raw, although I'm not sure if there's an auto functionality in the Camera Raw editor when it comes to this. There might be.
Upright, yeah.
Upright,
It was
is it
new
in there
a couple
too?
of years ago.
Okay,
I'm not sure if it's in the filter, but I know it's in the.
It's definitely in Camera,
Yeah,
or
in
definitely
Camera.
in Lightroom.
Yeah,
100% know it's in there. All right, so we've got this. I'm going to go ahead and select Warp now. And what you can do is you can begin clicking within these areas. I'm sorry, not within the areas. You can begin clicking these points and shifting the image. So I'm going to begin just shifting the image. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to try to shift the road just kind of a little bit more in line with what we want in terms of, the angle of our car, right? Our car is not perfectly in line with the road. We're not going to be able to turn the road enough to exactly get the car in line, but I think we can do it a little bit.
So is this a case where we're going to do a little on the road and a little on the car?
I don't even think we're going to do a little in the car.
Oh, okay.
It's much easier to do it on the background shot because the car, as you begin to turn, there's an expectation to like see a little bit more of the trunk or a little bit less of the hood and things like that. And a car will really bizarrely warp very quickly. Whereas a landscape, a lot of times it's pretty nondescript, right? Like, is somebody going to say that tree should be taller or not as wide? Probably not, unless it's like a really, really crazy amount of distortion that's been applied to something. So I'm even going to try to shift this over this way. See, if I dip it down too much, whoop, the road's basically gone. So we want to be careful about that. And I'm just going to shift and shift and shift just a little bit at a time. Kind of something like that. All right, so I'm going to commit this change. It's, we did a little bit. Give Photoshop a second. It's going to do its thing. This is a pretty large image. And if I shut this off, you can see we've got this whole area over here now that's empty. But just real quick, there was before, there's after. So you can see we've taken the road and we've just slid it over just a little bit. I'm going to shut this off, and I'm also going to shut my guide off. And let's go ahead and try using the old powerful content-aware fill and just see if we can fill this in. If not, we'll attack it manually with the clone stamp tool. I think we'll be fine either way. I'm going to go fill. And from the contents option, I'm going to choose content aware. And I am going to turn color adaptation on. I think it's on by default, but I want that on in this case. I'm going to hit OK. And by the way, I am on a totally destructive layer. It's not a smart object. It's nothing like that. It's just a pixel layer, which is why this is going to do anything for us. Then I'm going to hit Command or Control D to deselect, and it's pretty good. I mean, there's a little bit maybe that we could go in and tweak and adjust, and I can do something like that with, I prefer the healing brush tool, honestly, over the clone stamp tool. So healing brush, not the spot healing brush, but healing brush. This is like, this works like the clone stamp tool, but with superpowers of blending. So I'm gonna like sample out here and say, look, give me some of that tanniness, and then the green, and you can see it just blends everything nicely.
Nice.
Just helps get rid of some of that repeating pattern and things like that. It almost looks like we have a line in the sky there. No, maybe it's a streak on my screen. And I think like that's probably good enough. Again, if you're doing a project for a client, take the time and massage it. This would be a composite that we would spend a day on, not 2 hours. And if I'm spending a day on it and not explaining to people what's going on, I'm working even faster than this. So we're going to blast
Yeah, we
through
talked
this.
about multitasking yesterday.
Exactly, right. I'm going to go ahead and take this reflector out because, if we're here, let's just clean the image up. So I'm going to sample the grass here, use my square bracket keys, and I'm just going to paint over that. You can see the blending brush, it just does a beautiful job of just not only getting rid of stuff, but blending the color and the light and the texture and everything together there. It's really, really my preferred way of doing this. Honestly, we could come in here and wipe out that guardrail too if we wanted. Look at how, this is like a guardrail from Chicken Little or something. It's just like, bent way over. All right, so let's turn the car back on. And we want to go ahead and establish some perspective lines coming out of the car. I'm going to move the car way over here because I know my perspective lines are going to come shooting way off to the right. And then we'll grab the horizon of this image and we'll test our theory. Does perspective actually work? And I mean, I think we know the answer.
What a question.
If it doesn't work, well, the problem is with us, not with perspective. The weirdest things go through my head. I was on the cable car yesterday in San Francisco, checking out some stuff, and I was sitting there thinking, why do I use the term between, not betwixt? I spent the entire 20 minutes in the cable car thinking about that.
Well, who uses betwixt?
I think, folks who are influenced by the Brits.
Like 100 or 200 years ago, maybe?
I mean, no. I think more modern. I think more modern folks.
You should bring it in.
I've heard people dropping a betwixt now and then, and then I thought, well, betwixt sounds dumb, but then I say between. That sounds even dumber.
It's all subjective.
I don't know.
It's all perspective.
One of those things. I honestly don't know what goes on up here sometimes.
We're curious who uses betwixt.
Yeah, who uses betwixt
currently?
Who uses between?
Please vote.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and drag out a line. I want these lines to be as long as possible. I'm going to align it with the bottom of the actual wheels. So the metal on the wheels is what I'm looking to target here. And I'm targeting the top edge of my stroke to the bottom of the wheel. So you can see there, I'm pretty close to the wheel. Here, not quite so close. So we want to adjust this. I'm going to grab my move tool. I'm just going to nudge it upward So the front of the wheel's great now. The back of the wheel needs to be adjusted. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit, hit Command or Control T, and I'm gonna look for the center point. See that center anchor point there? And I'm gonna move it all the way back to the fulcrum. The fulcrum, for those of us that remember from, was it geometry or whatever class it was?
Physics maybe, yeah.
Physics maybe, it's probably physics, is where the lever bends. So that fulcrum point, we want to be right here where this line is correct. And we're gonna bend from that point up to right there on the back of the wheel. And it looks like a little tiny adjustment, but over the course of a long stretch of perspective grid line, one little tiny hair breadth off will be, 20 feet in terms of our composite. So it can be the difference between getting perspective like nails on or way off. So just take the time to adjust if you have to. And you can see here, our line's pretty long. I hope it's long enough. I think it will be, because this car doesn't have perspective lines that are gonna shoot way off into the distance. I'm gonna zoom out again. I'm like frenetically zooming in and out. When I don't have something to do, I'm like, just zoom out, zoom in. All right, I'm gonna drag another line here. This one we're targeting, let me just undo this. So we just did the bottom of the wheels. Now I'm gonna try to go across the top of the wheels. And I think I'm just gonna stick with this side of the car. I could go across like the bottom of the headlights and have lines go out the other way and maybe across the base of the windshield. Those lines in theory are gonna meet up down the road somewhere. So you can have multiple vanishing points for an object like this, as you come off of two sides. So, if you're looking at like a box car straight on, you're gonna have that one vanishing point as it kind of meets in the center of the frame or whatever. But something like this, you'll have multiple vanishing points. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna drag this line out. I'm targeting the top of the wheels, something kind of like that. I'm gonna zoom in and give it a little peek. And it looks like I got over here is pretty close, but once again, the back wheel is off a little bit. So we're gonna go Command or Control T again to free transform. There's our anchor point, defaults to the middle of our transform area. We're gonna move it back over here to our fulcrum, and there we go, just like that. And now I'm going to click and drag down, 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 just like that, and there we go. So what we can see here is where these lines meet up, that's the vanishing point of the car. So if we align that vanishing point to our horizon line, we then scale based upon that point, and we'll get proper size and positioning in our photo, and it'll just work. Let me show you. So I'm gonna take all three of these layers, because these three layers, they always stay together. In fact, we can right click and just link these layers. Yeah. So if I just take the car and I move it, it's just gonna stay together. It's not gonna be messed up. But if I were to composite this car right here, right now, looking at it, shadow messiness on the ground aside, you just kind of know it's not right? Even if you can't tell me why, you just sort of know it's not right. The car is way too big. I haven't seen a military truck that takes up 3 lanes of road like that, let alone a little Audi R8. Right, so we need to do some sizing here, but let's find our horizon line. I'm gonna select this image here. The horizon should be fairly straightforward, right? It looks like it's kind of right across here. Maybe it's at a little bit of an angle like this. And by the way, when you have an angled horizon, if you have an angled horizon, there it's pretty important to try to get 2 vanishing points off your object. Because let's say you're compositing like a Mercedes taking a really sharp turn and there's angle in the car. Your double vanishing point, if you get the horizon correctly, you're gonna not only get sizing and positioning right, but you're also gonna get the angle of the car, because both vanishing points have to stick to the horizon. So if the horizon's this tilted, boom, both your vanishing points are gonna be there. If it's tilted this way, and so on and so forth. I think you get the point. All right, I'm gonna zoom in, just double check here. It looks like our vanishing point has to move downward a little bit. The vanishing point also may have been curved, or the horizon may have been curved a little bit. I don't think that's curvature in the earth. I think that is the warping that we applied to this photo before. And the flat Earth people certainly wouldn't say it's curvature in the Earth anyway. Let's go ahead and select this car, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now here's where things get fun. I don't even care if I see the car for this part of the process. I am solely concerned with my vanishing point. In fact, I may select, this is our horizon. Remember yesterday I said I name all my layers?
All your layers.
I haven't been doing that today. Wow. So I've got my horizon here. I'm actually gonna fill this with, I'm gonna open up my swatches here. Let's fill this with like, I don't know, pink. I just want yellow. Let's fill it with pink. Then I just selected pink, my foreground color, Option Delete, Alt Backspace, boom, it changes the color. This way we have rapid differentiation between our horizon line and our perspective lines. So somewhere right in here, like this is the spot that should be touching the horizon. So I'm gonna grab the Audi. I'm gonna go, get me lined up like right there, all right? And you can see the Audi's way off screen. Now I'm gonna hit Command or Control T, And, well, let me just make sure we've got all these. Command-Control-T, I've got all my layers. I'm going to take that center anchor point, and I want to now perform all of my scaling, adjusting everything based upon as close to the center of the vanishing point as I can get, right there.
Is there a way to take that anchor point, that center point that you've just defined, and stick it there, essentially? Or would you have to, every transform
Every
operation,
transform you have to,
okay.
yeah. I mean, unless the vanishing point
yeah.
happens to be like in the top corner or something, you can use the functionality up
right.
here. But even you can see it's grayed out, and I believe that's because we're working with multiple objects, so probably not. But the point is, you should be able to get it pretty close after a couple of scales here. So I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt, that would be Shift and Option on the Mac, and begin scaling down, right? And so let's say I want the car about there in the road. Well, remember, we're still stuck to the horizon there. Now it's a matter of finding side-to-side positioning. So if I hold down Shift and I just drag the car to the side, right there in the middle of the road, I can commit that change. That size for the car should be the proper size for the car based on this image, again, as long as we got our perspective correct. So we can now zoom in on this, and it's a matter of working out. Everything looks heavy and giant because our shadow is all messed up. So let's go ahead and begin working on shadow, and then we'll begin working on kind of blending things and messing around with this. And we'll try to apply this to a photo of a person as well. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to select the mask for the Audi right there. And I'm going to do a lot of damage first and foremost because I want to, well, you know what? Actually, here's what we'll do first. Our tablet shut off. Let me turn it back on. Working on wireless mode. Wacom it's a wonderful auto power down mode, but sometimes it's not quite what I want. I'm going to select the mask, so I just Command or Control clicked the mask. It's going to load that as a selection, and I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to double click on the layer. I'm going to call this like shadow. I'm just going to call it shadow base. It's just going to be sort of a placeholder for me, and I'm going to fill it with whatever my foreground color happens to be. So Option Delete, Alt Backspace, and then Command or Control D to deselect. It's hot pink, whatever, it's fine. All it's going to do here, it's just going to preserve this outermost edge of our shadow. And we want to preserve that because we're going to have to create this mask all over again. Because you're going to see here, I'm going to select the mask for Audi. We're going to zoom in, and I'm going to begin doing some damage here. So I'm going to grab my brush tool, I'm painting with black, and I'm going to begin painting away everything that even approaches white or light gray, kind of, sort of like this. And again, this is a process where it's very, very helpful to have a tablet. Now, you can see here, we've got something that's going to be a little difficult to tackle there, right? Well, is it really going to be that difficult to tackle? I would beg to differ, because we can utilize something like the ellipse tool. We can drag out a selection that kind of approximates the edge of the wheel like that. And then what we can do is go select inverse. So now we're selecting everything outside of that little wheel. And we can just paint into there with reckless abandon, and we're not even going to touch the wheel. Command or Control D to deselect.
Friends, yeah.
I mean, it's so useful. You could probably boil most things you do in Photoshop down to selections.
Yeah.
You want to isolate little bits of editing, effect, color change, whatever it may be, on specific parts of your image, right? You want a mosaic effect just over somebody's face to conceal their identity like they do in like those surveillance tapes and stuff. Boom, you create the selection, and then you mosaic filter it. Otherwise, it's just some weird abstract piece of artwork.
Which might work for your purposes.
Which may work for your purposes, but for me, not quite.
No, not quite.
All right, so the same thing here underneath the car. We're going to go ahead and create this selection. I'm just going to stick with the polygonal lasso tool here for the inside part of the wheel. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just create the whole selection, and I'm just going to go ahead and dot in there a little bit. And that's probably a little bit too rough, right? I want it to be smoother. Whoops. Let me undo a couple times. And I'm going to make my brush much larger. And I'm just going to utilize the edge of the brush, right? Because the edge of the brush, it's a soft edge brush. So I'm just going to tap as I get closer. There we go. Command or Control D to deselect. So we get a nice natural fade of the shadow underneath there,
yeah.
Right? You see how that works?
Yep.
And then we'll slide over here in front of this wheel. And again, as you approach the wheels, you have really important heavy shadows at the base of the wheel. Like, these are super duper important. We can remake them, and we will probably end up remaking some of them. But let's just let's go ahead and just paint away for now. But that little like tail of a shadow that comes off the wheel is uber important. No pun intended in terms of the car place. But I'm going to go ahead here, and we're going to do the same thing with this wheel. We're going to use our ellipse tool here. And a lot of times you might think a wheel, oh, it's a perfect circle. Most of the time it's not. It is when you're looking at it from the perfect angle. But like in this case, we've got this tire that's turned, and it's just slightly off kilter.
Giuseppe is asking what kind of brush you're using. Is this just a
So
regular
this is just a
soft-edged brush?
regular 80 pixel total soft edge brush, absolutely no hardness. And the sizing of this brush, it all depends. We're working on a pretty big image here. This photo is 8,000 pixels wide by 3,048 pixels tall.
This is going up on an Audi billboard.
Exactly.
Probably.
In all likelihood, you're not working on an image quite that big, but it's just touch and feel, man. It's just touch and feel. As you're working on it, you're gonna know. Oh, I need to make my brush bigger. I need to make my brush smaller, and that's just the square bracket keys are such a fast and easy way.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to change the size of the brush in Photoshop, though. All right, now I can see here this selection's not quite where I want it, so I can switch to my ellipse tool again, and you can just use your arrow keys and you can nudge the selection just like that and get it exactly into place. And then Command Shift or Control Shift I. That goes ahead and inverses the selection. It's a nice little helpful hotkey there. We're gonna grab our brush again and we're just gonna paint away, paint away, paint away. You can see I got rid of that really important shadow I spent all that time harping about. I still got rid of it. So we're gonna go back in and clean that up in a little bit. I'm gonna get rid of this here. I can Command or Control D to deselect. We're done with that big old selection we created. The importance is to really try to knock out the white. Because that's, for very obvious reasons, not going to look very on brand for this particular shot. Bring this in a little bit, maybe something kind of like that, right? And then Command Shift I. And I know it probably, I don't know. Is it pretentious to say I'm making it look easy when I create the selections? It just takes, it's just a matter of you make 10,000 selections and eventually you just kind of, it's a touch and feel thing, right? For Eric Clapton, the guitar is like an extension of his hand. I'm not saying I'm Eric Clapton level when it comes to Photoshop, but what I'm saying is eventually it just gets to the point where it's like, oh, I want to play this note, boom. He doesn't even have to think, it just happens.
Yep, it's amazing, actually just to watch kind of all the tool switching is sort of a keyboard shortcut.
Right, oh, it's so much faster. It's so much faster. So L brings up the lasso tool.
But really, the principles of what we're doing are essentially using selections to give you boundaries so that you can erase or mask freely, knowing that you're not going to, jump into some area
the essential parts of the
that
photo.
you need to. And a variety of selection tools used to get those edges, and then switching back to the brush, always painting black on the layer mask to hide.
And we're going to go ahead and dust away that bit of white and light gray there. Command or Control D to deselect. And there we go. We've gotten rid of the bulk of the shadow. Now it still looks pretty funky because we don't really have much shadow on the front side of the car. That wheel looks very bizarre. And we have work. We got our work cut out for us. In fact, if I Command or Control click this layer here, we can see just how much of the shadow we kind of got rid of, right? So what I want to go ahead and do is first create the essential shadows underneath the wheel. Actually, no, I'll do that last. That'll be kind of the finishing touch. Let's create the base of the shadow everywhere else, and then we'll kind of take it from there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to paint with black. So I'm going to Command or Control D. I want to add a layer beneath the Audi layer here. So beneath this layer, and I'm moving down. I'm moving down behind my body. So I'm clicking behind my body here. I'm going to Command or Control click on the new layer icon, and this is going to create a new layer for us beneath the selected layer. I'm going to call this shadow, and I think I'm going to Command or Control click that shadow base just so I can really have a strong idea of where I'm working. I'm going to grab my brush tool. I'm going to hit the letter D to reset foreground and background colors to black and white. And I am going to reduce the opacity of this brush to probably like 30%. This is going to give me a long leash to work with in terms of painting in a shadow that's just extended enough, but not too much. We'll come around here.
So we've got a couple questions of people wondering why you maybe wouldn't isolate the parts that have the shadow and the white and then use a blend mode multiply to knock out the white.
You could do that. It's just, I don't know. I mean, I guess you probably could do it. There's merit to that. It's just you always have limitations in terms of, like it would work great here, for instance, because we're over a black road, but what if we'd gone with the snowy photo, right? Then we'd still have that white and we'd still be going over something that's close to white. Would screen, I guess, would probably still work because if the blown out white is that much brighter than the snow, it would probably still work. Yeah, I guess you could probably do that. You could isolate the shadow altogether and then try knocking it out. That'd be a way to do it.
Yeah. And maybe not necessarily shorter, though, all that selection work to kind of separate out the white and shadow layer from the car just to set the blending mode would take, just as long. Some pen tool.
Yeah, well, yeah, you probably pen tool around the wheels and pen tool around different things. And you also want to make sure, for instance, like here, you don't see where the wheel stops and the shadow begins. So you want to make sure that whatever blend mode you're working with, let's say it's a multiply blend mode, right, to just drop away the white or those lighter tones. You just want to make sure that this is solid enough black and the wheel is solid enough black black that you're not going to all of a sudden see a line down here, or you don't see a line and it's just like an artificial line that you had to make and it's kind of weird. Whatever. I mean, you can pick holes in anything. I think it's probably a method that whoever brought that up, I feel like there's plenty of merit for that. It's
Always 10 ways to do the same thing in Photoshop.
Exactly. All right, so now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and create the shadows for the wheels. This is kind of cool. So this is a great way to create shadows for stuff you composite in. We're going to be using it when we composite a model from one photo to another. It's just a really great way to create these shadows. So on the not shadow layer, I'm going to create another layer above it, and we're going to call this wheel shadow or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and use the ellipse tool, and I'm just going to drag a very small ellipse right at the base of the wheel like that, and I'm going to fill it with black. Option delete, the Alt backspace on the PC, and then we can go select, deselect. Next, I'm going to go filter, I'm going to go blur, and I'm going to choose motion blur. Now, part of the issue with this, let me just show you here. I'm going to drag this little black spot down here. That was the issue. The issue was it was tucked under the car. Now we can see what's going to happen here. I'm going to go motion blur, and 600 is a bit too much. But the nice thing about motion blur is it gives us this really nice blur where we have a heavy shadow in the middle, and it's going to blur those edges just perfectly. Now you could give this, I suppose, a little bit of an angle, but you just want to be careful. It does its best work when it's done side to side. I would almost say do it side to side and then free transform it if you had to, but I think we'll be good kind of rolling with this side to side. Let's go with, like, I don't know, 120 pixels. That should probably work for us. Now we've got this shadow, and this shadow can come over here underneath this wheel. We can hit Command or Control T. Because it's a shadow, we can probably expand it up quite a bit. Maybe pull it out this way a little bit more. Something sort of, kind of like that. That's cool. And then I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and duplicate this shadow. I'm going to duplicate it over to this side. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to zoom in, and now here I kind of need to take this back because remember the other shadow is like over here, not all the way in the foreground. So Command or Control T, and we can just rotate this guy a little bit. Rotate it a little bit, just kind of like that. There we go, something sort of like that. Maybe I'll right click, I'll even distort it a little. I'll pull this handle down and pull this handle up a little bit. We're just changing kind of the, as you can see, shape of the shadow. That's cool. And I can see a little white residual there. So I'll go back to my Audi layer, take my brush. I'm painting with black. I'm just using my square bracket key to knock the size of the brush down, and then just paint that little bit of like light halo-y white stuff away. I'm going to go back to the car shadow layer because I think I want to add a little bit of shading down under there. Just kind of darken that up a little bit, kind of something like that. All right, and then again here on the car mask layer, remember the other day we talked about that soft light blend mode with the brush? What I'm looking at, I'm gonna shut off the shadows for a quick second so we're not distracted. There's a little bit of like white matte edging. There's a little bit of white matte edging there. To get rid of that kind of stuff, you select the mask for the Audi car, set this to a blend mode, the brush to a blend mode of soft light. We'll probably boost our opacity up to 60 or so. We're painting with black. And we're just going to go ahead and paint over those edges and see if it helps clean that up for us a bit.
My favorite trick.
Certainly
learned this whole
certainly around the wheels, it's helped a lot. We still have a little bit of like super bright pixels. So for something like that, we're going to go back and restore the normal blend mode, set the opacity to 100%, right click. Let's make our brush real small. So we'll go smaller than 15. I want to make this teeny tiny. And then I'll click once, hold down Shift, click again right there, and then maybe come back. And there we go. It's, if we soften it enough, it's just going to blend in with the color of the car, and you can see it totally disappears. So let's come over here. We're going to turn our shadows back on from shadow to wheel shadow and all the shadows in between. There we go. And let's apply a shadow here to the back of the car. Let me shut these off again real quick. All right, I'm going to go back to here real quick because that bit of brightness should not be there, and that, I believe, is on the original car. There we go. Same thing over here. Let's get rid of some of that. Just clean that up a little bit.
And the net effect of what we're doing here with all these kind of smaller shadows that we're adding is to sort of bulk up the shadows underneath the car, almost give it more of its presence and weight in this scene.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So without the shadow, the car is going to look really out of place. Yeah. So if you can get your perspective and sizing right, and then you can get the shadows right, then we can talk about adjusting color and saturation and things like that, and then applying like overall blends and things like that to really kind of boomify the whole thing, to steal a term from my buddy Jared Polin over at Frono's Photo.
All right,
I'm going to Command or Control J and duplicate that layer. I'm going to drag this shadow back, and I'm going to place this underneath this wheel. Now this shadow has to be turned even further back, kind of so, ooh, hello. Something. It's easier. It's always easier to grab an edge. I'm going to bring this in a little bit, make it a little smaller. Something I think kind of like that. Maybe I'll right click, I'll distort this a little bit. I'll pull this side up just a touch. Kind of give it a little bit of a shadowy something like that. All right, that looks pretty cool. It kind of blends into the ground a little bit more. And we have a car that's sitting there. It's, you know, it still looks out of place because the color's off, the brightness is off. The saturation probably isn't too far off because everything in this scene is really saturated. And red with green is kind of a cool mix, but I still think we might try to change the color a little bit. One quick trick I want to show you here, speaking of changing color. We're not going to change the color this way, but it's just a great trick that I share whenever I have the opportunity to. You can quickly change the color specifically of objects like this, the car, something that's metallic or even a fabric, but cars work particularly well for this. I'm going to name this layer color. We can, let's say we want the car to be green, so I can just sample any old green, grab my brush tool, zoom in on this, and I can begin painting with green, right? And I can just say, green, 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 green.
Taking a spray can to the car.
Exactly. I'm taking this, what is it, $180,000 car, and we're spray painting it green. And then I bring this down here across the front, and you know, okay, looks pretty bad. But actually, let me remain zoomed in here. All you have to do is change the blend mode of this color layer to color. And it's going to retain all of the brightness and shadow values of the car and just pass the color. So the color blend mode passes the hue and saturation through. If you don't want to pass the saturation, you can just use the hue blend mode, which will, you can see that actually got brighter because the car is so saturated. It's more saturated than the green I applied. And you can do a lot of really cool stuff with this. You know, change the color of somebody's clothing, or you know, adjust the color of a car, or the sky, or water, the ocean, whatever it may be.
And you know, that's probably one of the most searched how to in
object.
Photoshop. Yeah, it's like
and this is such a quick, easy way.
How to remove a background, how to change the color of something.
This is such a quick, easy way because you don't need a mask with the hue saturation adjustment layer. You don't need to create a complex selection and then, you know, apply hue saturation destructively to a layer. Create a new layer, paint on that layer, boom. And I could even bring up hue saturation on this color layer. Remember, we're working with green, but if I swing the hue of the green, it's gonna swing the hue and change the color of the car because I'm straight changing the hue of the color on the color layer. So really a lot you can do there when it comes to that. It's really pretty cool. It's just a nice little tip.
Yeah.
Really not something we're going to do right here, right now, but something that's nice to know. Because this car is predominantly red, it's going to be easy to change the color of it using a clipped hue saturation adjustment layer. We can use a clipped hue saturation adjustment layer because we've spent all this time creating this selection and elaborately selecting the car. Before I get to that, I'm thinking I want to change the brightness a little bit. Sometimes viewing a scene in black and white really helps you see if something's brighter or darker. So I'm going to add a gradient map here, and I'm going to say, give me a black to white. I'm going to hit OK. And we can see that, yeah, the car definitely looks like it's sticking out, and in not a good way, right? It just, in the black and white, doesn't look right. So does that mean it needs to be a little brighter? Well, so let's apply maybe, let's go levels. Levels a little simpler. And I'm going to clip the levels adjustment layer here. Whoops, I'm going to clip the levels adjustment to the Audi by hitting Command Option or Control Alt G. I'm going to open up that levels adjustment layer, and I'm going to begin just swinging the car, making it darker, making it brighter. I think it needs to be a little bit brighter.
Oh yeah,
I think it needs to be
really bright sun coming.
A little more, a little more contrasty, maybe a little brighter yet, something like that. Do I need to lift the shadows a little bit? No, I think that's going to not do much good for us. Maybe I lift the shadows a little bit, all right? And then if I shut off the gradient map, we can see like the car doesn't necessarily look better, right? You could argue that it's much more rich like this, but we don't care about richness right now. We care about trying to help blend the brightness here in the scene. There are times when I set my camera, I'm shooting a camera raw, or in my raw mode, so it's not making the photo a black and white, but I'll turn on the black and white picture style when I'm doing street photography or something like that, especially where I'm looking at a busy scene, because it just helps me look at the light. I'm not distracted by the color. And I know because I'm shooting raw, I still have the color version if I want it, and a lot of times I do, but by shooting in black and white, I almost shoot weddings exclusively in black and white when I shoot a wedding or two here or there. Shoot it in black and white because I want to see the light. I want to see the light. It's so easy to see light in black and white. So something like that, I think that works a little bit more. I might boost the highlights even more. Open up those highlights a touch more, and then kind of something like that.
Kind of classic look too with the black and white. I mean, I know this is not the final output, but
and because this is this levels adjustment, doesn't matter if it doesn't look good right now. If we continue kind of piling on the effects, continue the blending, and it still doesn't look good, we can go back to that levels adjustment layer and swing the dials here and there. It's all this process of pushing back and forth. Again, part of the importance, I think, of working as non-destructively as possible, because we can always come back and mess around with that. All right, so let's try to match saturation now, and we're going to create what's called a saturation map. And we're going to do that using selective color. So I'm going to add a selective color adjustment layer here. I'm going to open up selective color. And what we do for a saturation map is we reduce the black slider for all of the color channels to -100. So I'm going to go -100 in the reds, -100 in the yellows, -100 in the greens, -100 in the cyans. I feel like you get where I'm going. I'm going to be quiet.
This would
now.
be one of the things that you speed up probably
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
tutorial video. Right?
Exactly. All right, so we got the magentas, and then for the tonal values, whites, neutrals, blacks, you boost them to 100. So we're going to go whites up to 100, neutrals up to 100, and blacks up to 100. All right, and now what we've got is sort of this visual representation of how, did I miss something here? Hold on. Did I get the blues? I didn't. I missed the blues. See, there's some blue left in the sky here. So we're going to set that to -100. So what we've got is the lighter an area of the photo is, the more saturated it is, right? If I put, did I say saturated? The more saturated.
Kind of just
It
like,
does kind of bump
flowed,
together.
yeah.
Okay, I thought I made a mistake there. We could do, let's just throw a vibrance adjustment layer here beneath the selective color, by the way. I'm going to open that up, and if I boost saturation, you can see everything is getting brighter. And then if I shut my saturation map off, it's just very, very colorful. Now also note, as we head to the kind of the hazy end of the sun, that's the darker part of the image. There's just not as much saturation in our color there. So sort of like the YUV vector scope if you're doing color grading, but maybe a little bit more rudimentary than something like that. I'm gonna get rid of vibrance here. And what I wanna do is, I think, at this point, I can look at it and say, do I want to make the car darker and kind of blend with the road? Probably not, and here's why. Because I know the road is essentially black. It's going to be black and white. You know, the majority is, it's 75% of the brightness of everything else in the image. So I don't necessarily want the saturation to match that of the road. I'm sorry, not brightness, but saturation value. The road is about 75% as saturated, for instance, as the green and yellow grass on the sides of the road. So if I desaturate the car to that point, right? So if I apply, let's add a hue saturation adjustment layer here, and let's clip it to the car layer. Command Option or Control Alt G. Bring this up, and I can use a little finger scrubby doodad, or I can say, look, just target the reds and desaturate them. I can say, all right, there. The car's about the brightness of the road. Saturation levels match. But when I bring it back, yeah, the saturation levels do match, but it's not a saturation level that we want, right? So it's a really helpful thing to see. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to kind of get it around the saturation of the grass. I feel like that'll kind of maybe sort of not look out of place. I'm going to go back to my reds channel, and I think I need to boost the saturation a little bit. Maybe I'll use a little finger scrubby slider here, and I'm going to try clicking on that. And remember, we're affecting the stuff underneath the selective color saturation map, because that's up there. And this can be a total game changer in terms of how you match color and stuff like that in composites. A lot of times it's the saturation that's off and you don't realize it.
Yeah.
You get the saturation right, and all of a sudden your image really looks like it blends. So there's before and there's after. So we're bringing everything together. One other thing we might want to do is target that ambient light and make it not so studio white, but more like reflected, that warm light from the sky. Warm light is blue. When you Kelvin scale and color temperature and how all that stuff works, the warmer it is, the cooler it looks, and the cooler it is temperature-wise, the warmer it looks. So just to wrap your mind around that for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and apply another selective color adjustment layer. And like we did, I think it was yesterday with the orange glass, yeah, where we targeted those kind of wrapping highlights. I'm going to Command Option G to just clip my selective color to hue saturation. I'm going to target the whites, and I'll probably try to push some yellow into them. So let's push a little yellow into that. Ooh, that's a bit much in the yellow department. Take some magenta out, which is going to add some green. And then I can look, do I want to remove cyan, which will make it more red, or do I want to increase the cyan and make it look like the sky is being reflected into the car? I actually think increasing cyan is pretty decent for us there. And at this point, if you see a glaring color shift that you absolutely want to go and change, like we look at this and say, you know what, I just want the car to have a little bit more greenness, as though it is being influenced by all the green coming off the grass on the sides of the road. Probably the way I would do that is adding a curves adjustment. And for those of you that aren't familiar with curves adjustment, prepare to have your mind blown a little bit. We're going to clip this again, so it's only, by the way, when we clip these masks, it's only affecting the car layer. See, they're all kind of like saying, look, just sort of step down into the car layer. That's what all these are doing. Command Option or Control Alt G to clip the curves adjustment layer. We're going to come to the green channel, and here I'll probably use the little finger scrubby thing and just nudge upward just a little bit. Just add a little bit of green to that as well.
And can you explain what you're doing when you take the
Yeah,
finger scrubby?
so the finger scrubby is just targeting that part of the photo. If I wanted to, the composite RGB, for instance, this is the brightness of the image. If I drag up, I make everything brighter. Well, I don't make everything brighter. Let me unclip this for a quick second. Command Option G to unclip. If I drag this up, it's going to make the whole image brighter. If I drag it down, it's going to make the whole image darker, right? Not necessarily better, just darker. You have this histogram back here, and if you know how to read a histogram, these are all the dark tones in your image, and it goes all the way up to the brightest tones in your image. Everything in between is some varying shades. So you can see we have a real high spike of white, and that's because we have total blown out detail in terms of white. Histogram, I've got a whole video on how to read a histogram. It's really important stuff. I would urge you to check that out after, of course, the live show is done here. But when I'm messing around in the green channel, if I pull up, I add green, but the opposite of green is magenta. So if I pull down, I add magenta, all right? The opposite of red is cyan. So if I pull down, I add cyan. If I pull up, I add red, all right? Nice and easy. Blue, if I pull up, I add blue. The opposite of blue, of course, is yellow. So if I pull down, I add yellow. You can add as many points, or just about as many points. I think it's like 16 points or something. You probably aren't going to need more than that. If you do, you need help, not more points. But you can add points anywhere along the way. So the idea is if I want to push more blue into the highlights, I would add a blue point somewhere up here and drag more blue into the highlights. And if I want more yellow in the shadowy part of the image, I pull down here, and you can see in the foreground where it's kind of darker, I'm getting more yellow, right? There's a little before and after in terms of the tonal change. But I'm going to hit this little reset arrow because I don't want to do that. I want to target just the car. Command Option or Control Alt G. And I'm going to pour some additional green into the car. So I'm going to push that up just a little bit, And I'm going to look to see what happens if I push a bunch of red in there. I don't know if that's what I want. Maybe some cyan. That looks kind of nice because, again, we're getting the color influence from the sky. That's kind of cool. I think the highlight on the roof of the car is a little too strong for this scene, but you know, we're working with what we got here. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow by pulling down on the blues. You can see there. And then I'm going to collapse this. So now we've affected brightness, we've affected some of the color, we've affected the saturation level of the color. And if I shut all these off, there was the car we dragged in, and here's what we've got right now. So we're getting closer, we're not quite there. In fact, I almost feel like the shadow should be a little bit bigger, but you're gonna see, I'm not gonna be too concerned about that because we're gonna make a change here in a moment. So what I wanna do is, what do I wanna do? I think I'm gonna make my change. I wanna make the car, I think it needs to be a little bit darker. I think the car does need to be a little bit darker. Maybe not quite as rich. Maybe desaturate it just a little bit. So I'm gonna go back to my hue saturation. I'm working in the reds. I bumped the saturation up a lot. Maybe I'll take it down a little bit, kind of like that. And I'm gonna kind of roll with that. Again, you can play with this all day long. And what's bugging me is the fact that the car is not straight between the lines on the road. Like it almost should be a shot of the car parked still, but we're not gonna settle for that. We're gonna make this car look like it's moving down the road. In fact, speeding down the road. And we're gonna do that by using a number of tools here in Photoshop that we have at our disposal. I'm gonna right click on my background layer here, and I am going to convert this to a smart object. I'm also gonna save my document here because this is a huge image, and what we're about to do is a little RAM intensive. In fact, before I jump in, do we have any questions? Do we have anything we can cover? Or nothing that's jumping out at you right away? Because I can keep going.
There were a lot of people saying suddenly that this stream went from, watching it to in their favorites folder to come back to
there you go.
Later.
I like it.
Yeah.
I love it. I don't just like it, I love it.
And at this point, it'd be a good time to mention that in 15 minutes, we're going to be doing portfolio reviews. I think there's a ton that have been submitted. We only have time to check out 2 of them, and we'll spend 5 to 10 minutes on each one.
We'll give you some good info if your portfolio
absolutely.
gets picked.
Yeah, and
it'll be fun.
Yeah, Nathan is
all in love.
Great, great feedback. It'll be really helpful for anybody to watch, but go ahead and submit a link to your portfolio. There's a form you can fill out in the portfolio review tab, and we'll take a look at those, provide some feedback.
Nice. All right, so let's go ahead and make this car look like it's speeding down the road. We're gonna do that here by going Filter, Blur Gallery, and choosing the Path Blur. I'm gonna go Path Blur here. And the path blur is kind of interesting, right? This looks interesting. It looks like a motion blur, but what you can do with the path is you can choose a point from which the blur is going to originate. And I want this blur to originate from my horizon line, and I want it to come down to about maybe like here on the road, but I want to take this center point and I want to curve it along with the road. In fact, I'm going to take this point. I'm going to move this back a little bit. Notice the little semi-opaqueness happening near the edges. Don't worry about that. We'll mess with that later. And I'm going to drag this point. If I can get my trackpad to click it, I'm going to drag this point over. There we go. And then I'm gonna bring this point over, kind of like that. Okay, that's cool. And now that we've done that once, obviously over here the road's moving up and down. That's not very realistic. So let's apply another path, and this one will be going this way. So I click once to add a new path. I drag it to where I want it to be. I click to place it, and you would continue placing a point, but I'm just gonna click that point, and it's gonna sort of close the path off. And for here, I'm just gonna give it a little bit of a bend, and maybe we'll do one more. We'll do one more path. We'll start here, and we'll come out like here, and then I'm going to click again to close the path off, and we'll give this just a little round-a-rooski as it comes down the road. The trees are flying by. I might actually go for something like this with the trees, just straight across, make the trees look a little bit more realistic like that. And then also for our guardrail, I feel like that should kind of be coming directly into the camera and not have as much of that twistiness happening to it. But it looks like it's gonna give us some of that.
So in the same way, you're kind of responding to the perspective of the background photo when making these lines. Essentially, you're kind of drawing
exactly.
a grid.
And
almost.
it's a matter of building out a blur that's going to look kind of as realistic as you can make it look, while still remembering that when a car's flying by, the moment, sort of the slice of depth of field where the car is probably going to be in focus. So, we're going to, obviously our car is going to remain in focus. Yeah, unless you missed your shot, in which case,
You better hope the car's coming around.
Yeah. Get it on lap number 2.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to hit OK. I'm not going to turn on high quality. You could turn on high quality. And by the way, over here in Blur Tools, you can affect how stretched this blur gets. Like if you want it to be like, the Concorde is flying by at, whatever, 1,100 miles an hour, that's going to be a crazy blur. Or if this car is just ripping down the road at 120 miles an hour or whatever, it's doing what it's doing. But you can see even here, it's just going to take a minute to apply this blur and do its thing. And now the car definitely looks pretty out of place now, but we'll fix that. We'll fix that here in a moment. And I think we'll add a little bit of a blurred shadow as well underneath to really kind of seal the deal. And then we'll do our overall, pull the image together, pull the tones together, pull it all together.
In the home
for the final,
yeah, the final minutes.
Exactly.
We got people saying they've learned so much about the buttons they've seen for years but have never touched.
Oh, there you go, Rachel Thomas. Shout out to you.
0.5 of the percent of Photoshop, which is true. Photoshop has how many? I mean, just endless amount of functions that you can use in combination.
This is true. This is like a sport commentary.
I think it was you were putting a point back there and said some.
Oh, he's coming around the bend.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't lose control. The white parts of the car are supposed to be cyan. I want them to be cyan influenced because I'm thinking about if the top of the car is very reflective, you're going to have the blue of the sky influencing whatever the color is. This might be a little bit too cyan-y, but we haven't finished with the colors yet. Don't worry. We're going to apply sort of an overarching color that will join all of this together.
Are we going to be using LUTs?
We will be using a LUT.
Day 3.
All right.
LUT.
So back here on the Audi layer, I'm going to select that again. We're going to zoom in, and we're going to apply yet another relatively new blur here in Photoshop. We're going to go Filter, Blur Gallery, and we've got a spin blur. See, we used to, when we would blur the wheels of cars, you would have to cut the wheel out, use free transform and stretch the wheel out straight and apply a radial blur, and then re-transform it back into place. But with spin blur, check this out. We can take a little circular thing here. Let's give Photoshop a minute. I maybe should have chosen a slightly smaller image to work on.
Right,
but I think we're doing all right. 8,000 pixels wide. So what we've got here is a blur that travels around in a circle within the outer limits of this circle. And then the little dots here, they're the edge of the spinning blur where it begins fading back to that outermost line. So I'm gonna just crunch those inward a bit, and then I'm gonna actually crunch the outermost line in a little bit. In fact, I might just shut off preview here. I think it'll make this move a little faster for us, and then we'll turn on preview once I've got the sizing correct. Because once you've got the sizing lined up, it should pretty much work fine. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna make this a bit smaller. I'm gonna go ahead and really dial this down. I want the outer limit to be like the outer edge of the wheel. Now, of course, those of you with the keen eye are probably picking up that we're going to be spinning some of the car body in an ideal world, you wouldn't be doing that, but today we're gonna kind of live with it. There we go, I've got that. I'm gonna probably, let's boost the blur angle to like 25 degrees, something like that. I'm gonna go ahead and preview this. Let's see what we've got here on the preview. We can see, there we go. We've got a wheel moving nicely, all right? I think that's pretty good. I'm gonna shut off preview, and we're gonna do it for the back end of the car as well, once preview shuts off. There we go. And all I need to do is, with this little pin tool, click a single time. It's gonna drop an entire oval for you to use. And I'm gonna go ahead and crunch this down, crunch it down. I'm gonna try to crunch it down. There we go. There we go. And then I'm gonna pull this in. There's only kind of so narrow you can go with this, I found. Although it's gonna be enough for us to get what we need to get here. I'm gonna rotate this a little bit like that. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna adjust this a little, and then I'm gonna pull these points out, because I want the wheel to be spinning, right? I mean, that's the goal of this after all. And again, blur angle here, we're probably gonna go with another 25 degrees, and we're just gonna go ahead and hit OK. I don't even care about the preview. Whatever we get, in all likelihood, is gonna be good enough here after we saw the way the front wheel looked. Again, what's kind of bugging me is the fact that the front wheel of the car is like yanked one direction, but it really is going to change the way the car looks in the scene just by adding those spinning wheels. And probably the last thing I would do before we do overarching color changes is duplicate my bottom shadow, Command or Control J, and just go ahead and go Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and I'm going to apply a side-to-side motion blur, kind of a lot, maybe like 300 pixels, and I'll duplicate this a few times. And then I'm going to select all those new shadows. I just shift-clicked from the top layer down to the bottom. And then Command or Control E to merge them together. And we'll call this like motion shadow, just like that. And what we can do with this is we can kind of pull this out a little bit if we want, or we can rotate it a little. We can move it around. It's going to require a little bit more masking, so maybe I'm not going to quite do that much with it. In fact, I can still see too much of the lightness. I'm going to go back to my shadow, and I think I'm going to paint a little bit more shadow in there, because that just looks bad.
While you're doing that, we had a question. What was your first Photoshop, which I'm assuming means what version did you start learning on?
Photoshop 4. I think I was 7 years old. It was 1994.
1994. And I told them that your first creation was a fuzzy green Gatorade logo.
Right. Fuzzy green Gatorade logo. You are correct about that. I'm gonna go ahead and try to paint some of the original shadow back here, I think.
And another question while you're doing that. Yeah. You applied the radial blur to the wheels.
Yeah.
We obviously saw some of that front fender flare come in front of it. Does that, you made a smart object, right? So would that be on a mask somewhere? How would you actually kind of take care of that?
Wait, hold on, repeat the question?
If we're over here on the front wheel.
Yes.
The radial blur took part of the actual,
So yes, if I had converted the Audi to a smart object, a mask, when you use any of those blur gallery blurs, a mask will be there for that blur, and you could just paint black over the fender. I just didn't convert it to a smart object because I know I'm not done messing around with the mask, and I want to keep playing with it. As you can see, I'm doing even right now because I'm trying to clean up this shadow here a little bit. I want it to look not quite as bad, right? I'm settling at this point.
That's a good.
Right. At this point, I'm settling for not quite as bad.
A good standard to uphold, not quite as bad.
All right, and the shadow is way too heavy, especially for a moving car, but we're gonna live with it, I think, at this point. I'll take the motion shadow, I'll just reduce the opacity a little bit. Something sort of kind of like that. All right, and what are we looking at time-wise, Michael?
We've got 6.5 minutes until portfolio reviews.
Perfect. So let's...
Yeah, we might have 5 minutes after that to do any final touches, but let's see where we get.
All right, well, what I'll probably do for the last 5 minutes is show you how to take a human off of the background using that same perspective effect.
In 5 minutes.
In 5 minutes. We'll do it in 5 minutes.
Challenge.
It won't be a perfect selection, but the principles will all be there.
Right.
So what we want to do here is begin just doing the overarching color adjustments for the whole scene. Whoop, not black and white there. Ooh, although looking at black and white, the car looks like it needs more contrast. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to boost blacks. I'm going to shift my midpoint over a little bit, kind of like that. That looks a little bit more correct. That's a little happy accident. All right, what I want to do here is I want to reduce contrast, and then add a LUT. Or we may go ahead and add a multiply desaturation layer. I'll show you what that is in a second. So I'm going to go levels here, and I'm going to boost the output point. All right, so it's going to lift all those shadows. I'm going to reduce the white point. Again, you can see we are just killing off our contrast. I may boost the white a little bit and open up the highlights just like that. And we'll go ahead, we'll first try applying a color lookup table. That's this adjustment layer way over here. We'll apply that color lookup table. And I'm going to try going with like crisp warm and see how that looks. Still too low contrast, but that's interesting. Let's try drop blues. That's not looking very good at all. Let's try like the Fuji F125 Kodak 2393. That's kind of interesting, but you can see here, while this looks pretty good, the contrast to the car is way off. The brightness of the car, way off. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna make sure I've got heavy shadows, and the car just looks too pink. So once again, we can use our hue saturation for the car, and I can either adjust the reds, right? I can say, look, reds, slide a little bit more toward the oranges, stop looking quite so pink, and do something like that. And I could even adjust the saturation a little bit more. Maybe actually I want to make it more saturated. Something like that. That looks kind of interesting. And then I will come back up to my levels adjustment here, and this is what's getting rid of contrast and brightening the image. I'll just begin reducing the opacity kind of until everything gets pulled together a little bit more. So probably something about kind of like that. And then always, the last step of any of these composites is just to add some grain, because grain just pulls everything together. It takes something that looks like it belonged in another image, especially when you're looking at it close up, and makes it look like it belongs. So we're gonna go edit, we're gonna go fill. I'm gonna say, look, fill with contents 50% gray, hit okay. And then we're gonna go filter, camera raw filter. And here in camera raw, I'm gonna zoom into 100% so I can really get an idea for the grain and what I've got going on. I'm gonna give this a monster amount of grain. We'll make the size a little bigger. Roughness, I'll make it semi-rough. Maybe not, mid-range roughness.
Mid-rough.
And then I'm gonna zoom this into 100%, just Command or Control and the number 1. And we're gonna set this to a blend mode of soft light. And you can see it's far too much grain, far too much grain. So I'm gonna reduce the opacity until I get enough grain. And a lot of times I'll add a second bout of grain, but I think in this case that works for us. You know, I think there's still too much going on here in terms of reducing the contrast. So I'm gonna just drag those points back apart a little bit more. And we go ahead and just match that contrast a little bit more. I feel like the wheels need a little bit more blur to match the background a little better. One thing you could do as well, by the way, you could select the whole Audi layer and its associated stack of adjustment layers and merge these specific selected layers to a new layer by hitting Command Option or Control Alt and the letter E. You can see there we go, we've got this copy of the car. And I could take this car and I could try motion blurring this. Now a lot of times, again, if you nail your shot, you're not gonna have motion blur associated with the car that you're photographing. But I can go ahead and try adding a little angular motion blur, something kind of sort of like that. I can hit OK. And I can try a few things. I can set this to like light and see what that looks. That looks really bad. I can try setting this to soft light. That's probably gonna look bad as well. So I can go normal, and I can drag this underneath the car like so. You can see there. And I'm gonna zoom in on this. And we would hit Command or Control T. We would probably move this back because the blur should be coming off like the back of the car, and then probably even do like some distortion type stuff where we're pulling the car back and making the car not quite so far back there. And, you know, kind of something, I don't know. You just play with it, and see what you get.
We got a question
Something
about
like so.
why choosing grain in the camera raw filter versus noise.
I think it's the best. I think it's the best way. You've got way more control. So when you apply grain here with noise, add noise, part of the issue is you kind of just get what you get. Yeah, you can choose uniform versus Gaussian, but do you know what the difference between uniform and Gaussian is? And yeah, monochromatic versus, you know, having some color in the grain. Sometimes if you want grain that has color in it, you're working on a project where that's important. Sometimes there's a lot of these like synth wave and retro graphics. Sometimes you want colored grain where you have those greens and reds and blues and things like that. That can be interesting and useful. But in Camera Raw, you have the ability not only to choose the amount of grain, but also the size of it and the detail level or crunch, the roughness. That's
crunchiness.
The crunchiness, exactly. So that's why I kind of did it that way. But there we have it. We've gone ahead and we've covered some stuff. And you know, again, it's not a perfect composite. Am I 100% happy with it? Absolutely not. But a lot of this stuff, especially when you're working with something like a car or a person, it's all about the perspective and angle. And if we had this car a little bit less 3/4, maybe it had a straight front wheel and it was more matching the road, or I'd found a stock photo where the road was, you know, curving in front of the camera a little bit more, the results would have been, you know, far different and far better. But again, it's something where, especially if you're going out shooting the project, you choose all those angles. You set all that stuff beforehand. What's the elevation of the camera? What lens am I shooting with? Do I want the 3/4? Am I just gonna do 10 shots of the car from looking straight at the nose of the car all the way around to the driver's side and just get a bunch of options to choose from in terms of your angle? And the great thing about this too, we cut this car off a white background. Arguably, it's easier to composite something like this if you photograph the car like out in a parking lot, because you have perspective lines that you can follow. You don't just have to rely on the car. You have straight, very easy to define and distinguish lines there in the environment for you already. So that kind of stuff, you may think like, oh, I can't composite this car because it's sitting in the Walmart parking lot or something. No, it's actually a little bit easier when you have something like that. And you'll see in the 5 minutes, if we're able to get to it, when I pull this woman off the background, you'll see that having lines in the actual image from which you pull your model, whether it's a car, person, whatever, is really helpful.
Cool. So in an hour and a half, we've arrived here, learned some amazing things about compositing, perspective lines especially, really helpful tips. Thank you, Nathaniel. I think at this point, we're gonna review portfolios. We've got 2 up. I'm gonna bring this over here. I think we're gonna do a little like title thing, change outfits.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
remember?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Now that you've reminded me.
So stay tuned.
Getting ready
We've
to
got
take a
2
journey.
portfolios that we're about to review live on stream. Hi, everybody. Can you hear us all right?
I feel ridiculous.
Yeah, well, we look ridiculous, but it's kind of fun.
I got to keep my mask down, though, because I can't breathe.
Outfit change, atmosphere change, planetary change. We are from another dimension right now. We're going to be taking a look at 2 portfolios. I've got them right here on screen. Looks like we're going to start off first one, Freddie Cairns in the UK.
I don't want to bump helmets.
Yeah, well. Photographer, little something about Freddie. He's a photographer, designer, huge passion for creating magical artwork and sharing it with other people around the world.
My helmet's coming apart. NASA's low budget these days.
That's right. We
I don't know what's going on.
Here.
I'm dying out here. I'm dying out here.
Cue the drama. Okay, let's take a look at this. So here's Freddie's work. I'm gonna allow you to actually be in the driver's seat.
Okay.
The space seat.
Literally.
Yeah.
Okay. So Freddie, looks like you're doing some. Well, first of all, one of the number one things that I get when I talk to agencies, like agencies that are getting photographers or designers work, is you have to know who your portfolio is for, right? Now, I understand as a beginning photographer, like when I first started taking pictures, it was like any good picture I took, well, that one's going to the portfolio because that looks sick. So just keep that in mind as you're building a portfolio. You build a portfolio, you don't just collect it. So what I mean by that is, let's say you want your client, you're a graphic design agency, right? You're obviously into photography. You're a graphic design agency and you want to do work for hospitals and financial institutions, right? You don't want to put the local diner menu that you designed in that portfolio. When that gets presented to a high-end client, I'm talking high-end clients. You're talking clients where you're doing a $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 job, right? That's the kind of stuff you want to do. You know, enough of the starving artist stuff. Like, let's get jobs. When you go after those kind of high-end clients, they want to see work that's tailored to them. And if you specialize in something, if you niche down to exactly what you want to do, you're always going to get more work. It seems like you would get more work by being like, well, I photograph cars and food or something, right? But imagine being a photographer that has this incredible 1970 Ford Mustang, and you want to hire a photographer to shoot this thing at the beach, and you go to a photographer's portfolio, and like they've got these super cool cars they're photographing, but then there's like a panini and a bowl of soup or something, and you're like, wait, what am I going to get if I hire this guy to take pictures for me? So you really want to make sure you build a portfolio with a specific customer in mind and step into that customer a little bit, sort of role play. Like I've seen people who literally will play it out in a conference room. Like I'm the representative from X Corp and we want this in our thing, and they're talking to somebody else, and then they'll like switch roles and they'll keep going back and forth, and they'll discover what that potential client wants. By sort of doing this, literally, it's like theatrical role playing,
acting method.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But as you audibly talk it out, you begin to realize who that customer is for you. So understanding who your portfolio is for, that's a big part of what we're doing. But let me look at your work here. All right, so Freddie Cairns. Freddie Cairns. Are these all clickable?
Let's see.
Nice. Okay. A little low res. nice. I would probably dial back, the image is slightly crooked. I would probably dial back on the blue and yellow adjustments, but not bad. It's a little busy. The essence of a beautiful photo is simplicity. If you can isolate an object or an idea, I mean, look at the classics. Look at the guys and the girls who do it really well. They do it in such a way that it's like, you look at the photo and you immediately understand what you're looking at. You're never kind of like just for this photo, it's hard to immediately pick out what the focal point is. I mean, my eyes went over here to this stand, but maybe it should really be like the end of the tracks.
Right, the leading lines of the tracks,
exactly.
kind of bringing you back there.
So it's just things like that. Like, depending, I don't know what kind of camera you're shooting with, but if you had a camera where you could step back, zoom in a little bit, what that's going to do, even if you're shooting at an aperture like f5.6 or even f8, if you're focused here on like the edge of the train platform, immediately by zooming in, stepping back, zooming in a little bit, you're going to begin to isolate, flatten the image a little bit, and bring out exactly sort of the slice of the image that you want in focus. But enough with that photo. Let's go on. Oh, what do we have next? Whoops. We've got this. So it looks like we've got a little bit of, you're trying to fake the tilt shift, which is fine. Very extreme Dutch angle. My two biggest gripes with this photo are the extreme Dutch angle. It just kind of feels amateur-y, right? You want to step forward 6 months in your photography career. Don't put Dutch angle-y stuff in your portfolio.
That's a term, Dutch angle.
Yeah, it's called a Dutch angle. Okay. I don't really know why. I don't know if it's the windmill or the dikes. I'm not sure what it is, but it comes from somewhere. I don't know what it is. But so that's it's where you kind of get you want to turn the camera onto its side and take a picture like that. And it's look, it's fun to do. Don't get me wrong. But again, we want a portfolio that's going to get you work, man. We want to get you some work. So I would do that, and also it's cropped in a little bit too tightly. Give it a little breathing room. Again, the backdrop here is the sky. You have a built-in simple backdrop, right? It's baked in right there for you.
And it looks like a gorgeous kind of
and you get
textured
great goofy clouds and everything. Yeah. So and if if I'm really gonna nitpick, kind of up here we're touching the edge of the frame, and then over here we've got some space. But again, a lot of little things. This would be a great photo. Again, great photo if we reduce contrast and do away with the heavy blue cast in the shadows. A little drip of blue in the shadows, hey, that's totally fine. That's, I mean, the essence of like most cinematic color grading is that blue shadow, orange, peachy, peachy, orangey highlight. So there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times, I remember I did it all the time. Sometimes I still do it, quite frankly. You think, make the image better, add contrast. When in reality, a lot of times to make the image better, you reduce contrast. One of the things that made shows that HBO produces so cinematic and so beautiful is a lot of their grading is very low contrast. It has that cinematic feel. Open the shadows, flatten the highlights a little bit. I'm not saying it has to look like, raw red footage coming off one of those, $60,000 cameras, but a lot of times pumping in too much contrast can do more damage than good.
Kind of lightens the scene or the image, makes it a little more natural. So
this is a great photo. The color grading is a little too red, but it's a nice photo because you have a very clearly distinguished foreground, middle, and background. It looks like you tried to apply, again, more of the tilt shift effect because the top of this cool looking tower is all blurry. Yeah. And I think it would be cool to see that in its full, fine detail. That's a really neat looking building, and I would love to see that. And then you kind of have the photo balanced because there are these boats on the water over here. The only gripe I would have with this is just I would probably do away with the blur. If you want to blur the foreground a little bit, actually that kind of looks natural.
Leads your eye out.
Right, exactly. It kind of looks natural. I would probably chill on the blur a little bit, especially at least for the top of that tower. And the color grading, I would try to loosen up some of the reds, particularly the reds in the shadows. Just a little bit too much there. But it looks good, man. This one's the best yet. All right, again, much of the same problems. Just too much of that heavy color cast, too much contrast. Again, so here in the vignette too, I'm not a giant fan of the vignette, but there are a lot of people that like it. So if you like it, it's not like it's a horrible thing to do or anything. But yeah, this would be the same thing. I would just reduce contrast a little bit and kind of lift that grading. And I understand why you did it in this image. It almost looks like the horizon's a little tilted. Am I seeing things, or does it kind of looks like it's a little tilted? It's just those little things. Getting the composition right and straighten the images out and things like that. It's going to make a world of difference in your portfolio. And it's little stuff. It's easy to fix. It's not like you're years away, you're days away. But a photo like this, I understand why you boosted the contrast and added the color, because it's kind of a boring gray photo, right? If you've ever been to like New England here in the United States, there's a lot of these kind of wharfs and marinas and things like that. And so you got your gray rails and the woods turned gray and the sky is gray and overcast and things like that. So, you know, you're trying to infuse visual interest, you know, by adding the color and things like that. A lot of times it's just kind of, it might just be because it's a photo that's not really meant to be in your portfolio. You know what I mean? There's something here that's interesting, maybe not this. Here's a suggestion. See this little bench here? If you had gotten close to that, squatted down, and shot that bench, so the bench was like, you know, filling this much of the frame, like a huge part of the foreground of the frame, and you were down low, it would help isolate the bench, simplify the background by dropping some of that out of focus, and you'd have, you know, right away you'd have an object that you're looking at. Now the focal point's pretty well defined in this photo. I would say pretty clearly it's right there, but it's kind of like, again, when you take a photo, there's that, like, you love it, right? You love that photo, and it's so hard to go through and edit your own photos and pick which ones are actually good, because there's that emotional connection where it's like, I'll look at my photos and be like, I love this one, the client needs to take this one, and they never take that one. They're always like, oh, we hated that one. I'm like, what? I thought that was the best one. That was amazing. I love that one. And they hate it. So a lot of times, you know, it's a matter of the more like brutally honest you can be with yourself when you're doing your own culling, right? So you come back from hanging out at the park and shooting some photos and just saying, look, too busy. This photo's too busy. It's just not going to work, right? And eventually it'll get to the point where you see the scene and you're like, it's interesting. I'm going to find something that's more interesting, right? So you got the bench. What about getting close to the railing and shooting down along the railing? So you just have this rail that's going way out to nothing, right? You almost imagine being in focus, and as it goes 100 yards away from you, it's falling out of focus, right? There are two photo opportunities here, and by trying to capture everything, you end up capturing nothing, right? So that's, you know, that would be my critique of a photo like this. I think this is a very important photo, though, because it showcases something that can be, I think, so helpful to a lot of photographers, especially if you're just getting started.
Right. And it's showing kind of an attempt to understand compositional basics. I mean,
Right.
leading lines,
Repeating
rule of thirds,
elements.
yeah.
You got repeating elements. And
Symmetry.
Yeah.
That's great. So we're going to move on to the other one. One piece of feedback I really like to give. I'm an art director here at Adobe, so often I'm looking on Behance for photographers, designers, I mean, you name it, animators. Behance is one of the platforms we love to look for artists on. And so I actually like to take a look at this front page, the avatar, the description that you give, and the thumbnails as sort of the first look into your portfolio. And I would suggest, you've got a great description about who you are, what you're passionate about. I think that's really great. It's really helpful to know that there's a human behind.
Like, this is an awesome shot.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Like, this has a film vibe to it, right? This is great. The problem is, I'm assuming it's the same shoot.
Yeah.
Everything looks different. So again, you want for your fashion shoots or model shoots, you want to try to establish some cohesiveness, right? And that could be, it could be as simple as every photo coming out of the shoot is going to be black and white. Like, that's very cool. Again, you know, a little bit of, again, more of the Dutch angle, but if we kept the color of this first photo in the second photo would be like, whoa, insanely great, right? And the same thing, if we kept the same standard of color in all the photos, like, pick a way you want to edit that scene and edit all the photos from the scene that way. But these are great too. I mean, you got, it's a super cool scenery. The location obviously great.
Yeah, gorgeous.
The light, it's great. The sky looks great. You're framing it up. You understand you're shooting right down the alleyway. Super cool. I mean, this, if you were to re-edit these, this would be a great little book of photos. Great little book of photos. And the model shoot, if more stuff looked like that first photo, that's got such a cool, like, gritty film vibe to it. That's very neat.
Cool. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
All right.
Freddie, I appreciate it, man.
Thank you for submitting.
I appreciate you allowing me to critique your work. That is an honor for me. I'm very thankful for that, man.
Nice.
Because I know it takes some guts to kind of step out there, and I don't want you to feel like we're just ripping you down. I want you a year from now to look back at this work and be like, that was very helpful. I feel like I'm a 10 times better photographer. So that's the way I look at this stuff. So thank you.
So we've got Montasir from Bangladesh, currently studying, interested in fine art, lots of compositing work. I think since there's a bulk of work here, like, what is your eye drawn to immediately?
Well, I'm always drawn to, I don't know, let's move down. Let's look at, I don't know, let's just pull this up.
Yeah.
So that's cool. It's very busy. It goes out to, I almost would have liked to see the ocean extend out to the rocks out there rather than go to the sky, but it is kind of like wild the way it goes to the sky. I appreciate the glow around the lights casting on the ocean walls. I like the way that you've faded the ocean walls together. I think it might be cool. Again, I don't know if you were watching the stream yesterday, but when we did the orange juice composite, by adding some highlight and shadow to the edges, you can really create an edge that looks real. I mean, even here, I don't know if you guys can see it on the stream, but even the top of like Michael's MacBook, it's got this little edge of light from our studio lights here, right? If you drew this MacBook without the little edge of light, it wouldn't look right. You might not know why it doesn't look right, but that's why, because it's missing that very important defining edge. This one's not bad. Again, maybe a little bit too contrasty for my taste, but I think that's more personal taste than anything. That one's not bad. Let me go see. Let's try to find something that we see something wrong with. And I'll stick with more of the composite-y stuff here. Let's look at this. Let's look at some of the newer stuff. All right, very cool. The selection around the window, I think, could be a little bit better. I see a little bit of haloing. Also around the little butterfly there. Oh wow, look at that. Okay, we're seeing the whole picture now.
Yeah.
The butterfly's got a little bit of a weird glow around it. I like the sun rays coming in. I think the sun rays should be a little bit stronger, especially if she's recoiling that much against them. Visually, I feel like you should be able to see a little bit more of them. Also, the backlight here on the back of her arm, there's no light coming from behind her in this scene. So we would probably want to neutralize that a little bit. You could argue that it's the front light coming through the window and lighting it, but that definitely looks like light that's coming like straight up from the bottom more than something that's coming from in front of her. So I would just try to neutralize that a little bit. At the very least, take the blueness out of it. If you take the blueness out of it, maybe change the color of it just a little bit. It'll be much better. See how it's got that blue cast?
Yep.
And then just you can see around the dress. It's not quite as perfect a selection as you would like, and a lot of that's just kind of the soft light brush tip we talked about. We just go over and just kind of fade the edge down. And if you absolutely have to, if none of the selection tools are cutting it, and you have to go in and use a small, the way you do this is take a small 15 or 20 pixel, maybe even smaller depending on how large your image is, a small brush with like 50% hardness, and set the brush to like between 30 and 50% opacity, and just go over, dust over those edges, just be a little semi-opaque. Like if you were to take a picture of Michael and I right now over the background behind us, not even like the artwork background, but the background actually in studio behind us, the edges of us are not gonna be perfectly crispy sharp. There's gonna be some, like just a little tiny thin blurriness on that edge where the background color is sort of showing through and wrapping around just a teeny tiny bit. So that's something there that I think would be helpful for that. And then it's a matter of, I don't know, it looks like the blur is fake. I don't know if it was in the photo. That's not bad. I would probably try to correct the shadow around the chain a little bit. Again, it's just more detail work. It looks good from afar, but as you examine a little closer, I think it could be a little nicer. And also the white balance seems a little off. So she seems very blue compared to both the wood around her and even the light coming in from outside. Either I would try to make the whole scene a little bit more steely blue and maybe a little darker, so just tone down the highlights a little bit and introduce a little blue to the midtones, or I would just bite the bullet and I would warm up the whole scene a little bit. Now, of course, warming up a scene like this, you begin to kill that like desperate, I'm all alone, this is scary kind of emotion. So you probably do want to stay in the cooler range when it comes to the mood of the photo, but just something to consider for that one. Let's look at another new one here. Let me look at this floral one. Look at that, you got an astronaut. Can I actually play it? Oh, nice. See, this is beautiful. Yeah. This is great. I mean, he looks a little funky, like something depth-wise looks messed up. Like there should be a better shadow from the little umbilical cord or whatever they call it that connects the astronaut back to the space station. Something looks a little weird there. And again, here's what it might be. You have this orb of sun glowing light, whatever it is behind him, yet there's nothing backlighting him. He's got no light wrapping around his shoulders, arms, helmet, and the flowers also have nothing around those edges. If you were to do something like Command or Control, click the layer that he's on, contract that selection, inverse that selection and feather it, and then just use the dodge tools to just dodge a very soft lit edge around him, you'd be able to build your own rim light that way. So again, it's something, maybe it's difficult to just take it from what I'm saying, but if I were to show you, you'd see exactly what I'm talking about. And you could even use an extremely light blue. Like I probably wouldn't go with the white. I would go with like just just heading in the direction of whatever the blue is that you have. But I love the colors. I love the fadedness. I love the way you faded the shadows.
Yeah.
That sort of pinky red of the flowers and that bluish, purplish, whatever color is going on in the background. It's hard for me to see blue and purple. But it works together really nicely. It looks nice. It looks smooth. It looks... It just looks nice. Looks nice. But again, it's just a matter of the composite, getting the astronaut into place. And maybe with even the little cord out, if there's a little bit of that highlight along the cord as well, because that should be illuminated by that little sun orb light behind him too. That's a little creepy looking almost. I don't know if it's supposed to be her ghost standing up out of her.
Yeah. Well, well, I think the overall impression of this portfolio, again, from my perspective on this sort of zoomed out view when we look at the overall portfolios, it got a pretty nice consistency with this sort of stylistically and color-wise. So again, kind of maybe hearkening back a little bit to what you were saying, it's like put the work out there that you want to be doing, that you feel really strongly about. If it's thematically connected in some way, like that makes it stronger. It means that you have a point of view, that you're confident in that point of view, and you can sort of see that from most of the work.
This is very nice. This is very nice. Yeah. I mean, it's done well. The selection is done well, and I think that's my biggest critique overall of your portfolio, man. Is I would just pay attention to the details a little bit more, right? Like the rim light around these balloons. It shouldn't be that color. It should honestly, it should probably almost be gone, or just be a little bit darker, maybe a little bit more blue, or whatever the dominant color of your. Well, you get the sun there. I don't know. It's coming across as too bright. However it is, and I think it's probably because the balloons are so much brighter than any edge light that she has. So maybe like this arm on her should be brightened up, and edge light should be there, or something like that. This, maybe perspective and size-wise, looks a little weird, although how can I say a house floating on a rock
on
floating
a rock,
in space looks weird. It's probably just the way it's supposed to be, right? So yeah, I think if I had one critique for your portfolio above all else, try to pay attention to those details a little bit more. Like I think the grain is a little bit too heavy in the shot, right? The grain's a little bit too heavy. Maybe the colors aren't quite as, the color theme across the board could be a little bit more contiguous. It could just kind of mesh a little bit better. And those kind of like edges of selections, edges of light, kind of stuff like that. I mean, you clean that stuff up, and you're gonna be putting out some legit level stuff soon. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice, though. I appreciate you submitting as well.
Yeah,
man.
thank you for submitting. Thank you to everybody for submitting. It's a shame that we only have time to review 2 portfolios. There's a ton of great work to be seen. So make sure that you submit. Even if you submitted during this segment, our next segment's going to be going on in about 10 minutes. Resubmit your work. You may have a chance to get it reviewed live. What are we going to do with the last 4 minutes?
So I want to show you guys how to take what we did here with this in terms of working with all of this composite-y stuff and perspective stuff, and apply it to a full-grown person who we want to move into another scene. So we've got this shot from Kenya. That looks pretty cool. And we've got this this young lady walking down this pathway. Now imagine, if this was a photo over a white background, we would have no lines, no basis from which we can draw perspective or get an idea of her perspective. She's photographed in this scene. So if we can steal the perspective of the scene, we steal the perspective of her, and we get her exactly as she should be in our scene. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to come over here to Kenya. I am going to drag out what would be my horizon line, and I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to pull it out nice and long, just like that. And I'm going to go to my swatches, and I'll probably fill this with, I don't know, yellow, something easy to see here. And collapse my swatches panel, drag my adjustments panel back up. And there we go. We've got our horizon. Let me zoom in. Just make sure we're close enough. Again, whoop, can't nudge the layer because it's locked, and that's because I'm not selecting the correct layer. All right, so right there's our horizon for our Kenya shot. Looking good, looking strong, looking great, feeling even better. That's most important. All right, here's what we're gonna do. We are going to establish some lines, and this is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, I'm just gonna zoom out. I've got this line right here. I can just take it like that, and then I can take another line right off of it here, just like that. And right there's my perspective. So I could select this, I could go over here, I could go select subject, and it should pretty much pick her out, close to it. It's been doing a pretty decent job this whole time for us, right? I'm gonna go Command or Control J, and then I would take all 3 of these layers, I would move them over to my Kenya shot, and she's gonna be way too big. I'm gonna, with these 3 layers selected, Command or Control T, right click and flip her horizontally. Flip her horizontally, there we go. So now she's over here on our path. And we're gonna do the same thing we did before. Just try to line up our vanishing point here with the horizon, like so. Command or Control T again. I'm speeding through this, guys, because we're coming down the home stretch here. I'm going to align my center point right there, finish zooming out, and then Shift Option or Shift Alt, and just scale her down just like that. And then I would hold down Shift and drag her over to the pathway where she would be, just like that. And that's where she should be. I can shut off my my lines. That's where she would be. If I very quickly come in here, create a new layer, and just with the brush tool,
We got 10 seconds.
We got 10 seconds. With the brush tool, paint a little shadow underneath her, which is not going to look that great. We would go ahead and have a shot where she at least looks like she's in the right place.
She's the right height.
You would go ahead and change the brightness and the saturation color, everything like that, and it would be what it is.
Cool. Well, thank you, Nathaniel, for all the Photoshop compositing tips. Again, rewatch these. They'll be available online on YouTube. You can play them at slow speed. You can learn it. There's like 100 things that I learned alone.
Yes.
I know you have a really cool sign-off, so I'm going to let you do it. I'm Michael Jarrett. It's been a pleasure having you. This is the last day of our stream, so thank you for watching, and take it away.
Guys, we've covered so much in the last 3 days. Really, it's been a blast. Everyone here at Adobe's been pretty awesome. So for the classic sign-off, for what we've done 2 days ago, yesterday, today, when it comes to paths, shapes, composites, coloring, lettering, layering, and about 1,000 other things in between, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Get it, got it, good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.
See ya.
See you guys.